'Tis the Damn Season for a Christmas Miracle by Peacockgirl. Chapter 1. Morgan loves Christmas, usually, but this one's the worst. Because Petey's supposed to be here for the first time ever. She's been looking forward to it for days and days and days and days. Her whole life, really, but especially since the one time Petey came over after Daddy woke up and promised he'd spend Christmas with them. He promised, and so did Daddy, but Petey's not here. She hasn't seen her brother since he made that promise. A few days later he went on some school trip that Mommy called an international disaster. He'd FaceTimed Daddy once or twice after that, looking stressed like Daddy did when he spent too much time in the garage. So Morgan had barged into the calls, twirling around and telling him all about her day until he smiled. But he hadn't called since Halloween, and she still hasn't told him how she dressed up as Spider-Woman, and Happy laughed, but Daddy cried, and then ordered her so much candy that Mommy had to hide it in the closet. Mommy and Daddy have been impossible for months. Because sometime after Halloween, they started pretending Petey isn't real, and no matter how many times she tells them it isn't funny, they won't stop joking. She thought it was a Santa situation, that if she played along and acted like Petey was imaginary, just like she acted like some silly old man in a red suit brought most of her presents, then on Christmas morning he'd be there. Then they'd all laugh and have the best time. But when she sneaks downstairs, all she finds is a tower of presents. "Petey," she whispers, circling the tree. There are so many boxes, and a few are pretty big, but none are big enough to hold her brother. "Petey," she says louder, looking behind the couch and even in the fireplace, which is stupid, but Mommy and Daddy seem pretty committed to this Santa story. At least they never gave her a spying elf like Sally's parents. Sometimes Daddy gives Dummy a pair of reindeer antlers and moves him around the house, but he never pretends that Santa's done it. "Getting an early start, huh, Morgana?" Daddy says as he stumbles down the stairs. "What time is it, Fry?" "It's 5:47 a.m, boss." Jesus. Daddy chuckles at something Morgan doesn't understand. "Merry Christmas, Menace." He opens his arms and she runs into them, letting him swing her up until she's nestled against his chest. "Where's Petey?" she asked. She doesn't want to play this game any longer. "What's a Petey?" Daddy asks, shuffling towards the kitchen. "Was that on your list? Apparently Santa's pretty good at lists." "Santa's not real and I want my brother," she shouts, trying to squirm away, but Daddy holds tight until they reach the counter. He sets her down beside the coffee maker, even though she's not allowed up there. "You're what now?" He blinks at her and then turns to start the coffee. Before Halloween, Morgan never knew her dad was such a good actor. Whenever he smiles at the photographers, it looks so fake, nothing like when he smiles at her. But she bets most people wouldn't believe in Petey either if they only listened to her dad. "Petey, my brother." "Ah," Daddy takes a big gulp of coffee, and then chokes. Too hot. "Was that what you asked Santa for? A little brother? Kinda a big ask, even for the big man. It's not impossible, but it's not likely, considering our age." "Petey's not little, he's big. He's almost as tall as you, but he's not that old. Just kinda old. You call him your favourite young adult." Daddy blinks again and his face scrunches up. "Now I'm confused." "You're the one being confusing." "Hey now, little miss, watch that tone." "Aren't we all in a fine mood this morning?" Mommy crosses her arms as she walks in the kitchen and frowns in a way that means everyone's supposed to listen. "Breakfast, then presents?" "That's a cruel and unusual punishment," Daddy says, giving Mommy a quick kiss. Morgan looks away and scrunches her nose. "Maybe it'll put us all in for proper Christmas spirit." Morgan spends all breakfast waiting for Petey to burst through the door. Maybe it is too early, like Daddy says. But Petey doesn't come. He's not in any of the boxes either. "Is this it?" she asks once she's opened all her presents, feeling her lips tremble and tears start to fall. She's gotten everything she asked for, except the one thing she wanted most of all. Daddy looks sad, but Mommy frowns again. "Morgan, honey, this was a lot of gifts." But none of them can play with her or make Daddy smile or stop a car with their bare hands. They can't take her swinging like Petey promised, even though Mommy said no. They aren't kind and funny and smart and heroic and all the other things Daddy told her Petey is. They don't love her like her brother's supposed to. I don't want them. I want Petey. Mommy crouches down so they're the same size. Honey, she says slowly like Morgan's done, we've been over this. Petey isn't real. Morgan may be a lot of things, but she isn't stupid. You're ruining Christmas. Mommy reaches for her, but Morgan darts away, running to her room and slamming the door. Then she collapses against it, crying until she has no tears left. She thinks maybe Daddy will come and tell her Petey will be here for lunch. At the very least, he'll give her a hug and maybe a juice pop. But no one comes. She has to hug Spidey instead. Her plushie reminds her of Petey, which makes her want to cry again. But it reminds her she can't give up. Wherever Petey is, he's not here, which means he's missing out on presents and tasty food and family. Morgan wants to be a hero, just like Petey. Maybe that means she needs to rescue him. When she stands by the door, she can hear her parents talking downstairs. They sound loud and angry, like they're having a bad Christmas too. What do you want me to do, Pep? I don't know, but our daughter shouldn't be up in her room crying on Christmas. She just needs some time to cool down. She'll get over it. She's 5. Will she? She's been talking about this Petey for weeks. She hasn't gotten over it yet. Is she expecting us to play along? I didn't know where this came from. I know she's never known that many people, but she has friends at school. I thought she'd be okay. She will be okay. Morgan's lip wobbles. She wants Daddy upstairs, whispering this into her hair. She wished she hadn't stormed off to spend Christmas alone. But maybe she's onto something, Daddy continues. There's something about today that seems missing. Now don't you start. Tell me you don't feel it too. Why isn't today perfect? What I feel is the start of a migraine. Fine, maybe I am crazy. Wouldn't be the first time. I'm going to the garage. Morgan hears the front door slam, but she's filled with hope. Maybe Daddy's not pretending not to know Petey. Maybe he's forgotten somehow. She'll just have to help him remember. For most of his life, Tony hated Christmas. Nothing like ritualised disappointment to undermine his already shaky mental health. The holidays were a time for his parents to dress up in meaningless gifts, in very expensive boxes, putting on a show for the world that never extended to actually giving a damn about their kid, who needed affection so much more than another possession. His attitude had changed, sometime before Morgan came along. Once she was born, he tried so hard to give her everything he'd never had. Silly traditions and meaningful time spent together. And okay, yes, a pile of presents, but ones he'd picked out or even made himself, instead of delegating the task to a personal assistant. Morgan's joy is infectious, and she loves Christmas so much that Tony is almost convinced that he is a much better father than Howard. But today he feels like the Grinch. As much as he knows he should be grovelling for forgiveness outside his daughter's door, he can't make himself do it. He doesn't understand why she's upset. He understands even less why he's upset. He'd been on edge even before her outburst, walking with a strange sense of dread and loss and absence that he couldn't explain. And ever since she'd mentioned the mysteriously made-up Petey, his head had been killing him. The truth is, he can barely stand to be in the same room as Morgan, and it's driving him insane. Was this how Howard had felt about him? It makes Tony hate himself more than he ever has, and that's a really high bar. But he can't make the feeling go away, no matter how hard he tries. Morgan's done nothing wrong, and Tony doesn't know what has changed. But whenever he sees her, he hurts, with an extra strong cocktail of grief and guilt and confusion. It overwhelms him, leaving him barely able to think, like he's actually hungover. Maybe that's why this Petey thing throws him. He's heard Morgan ramble on about this stranger before, but he's been too distracted to listen or retain any details. But Morgan is brilliant, and Tony had started internalising his parents' distance when he was around her age. Maybe she's acting up because he can sense her pulling away. It makes his stomach roll. Tony puts down the wires he's been fiddling with and resolves to go hug his daughter. Daddy. He looks up. Just like the miracle she is, she's already in the doorway, clutching one of her stuffed animals like a lifeline. Her lip trembles and her face is smeared with tears, and Tony loathes himself. Oh, Princess, come here. He opens his arms and Morgan runs to him without hesitation, even though he doesn't deserve it. He lifts her so she's curled against him, her precious hands clasped around his neck. He strokes through her tangled hair. You know I love you, baby, right? She nods against him. 3,000. 3,000, he affirms, blown away by her easy trust. The embrace feels like forgiveness. This is what Howard never bothered with. Apologies or comfort. I'm sorry for being such a grump, Morgana. I didn't mean to ruin your Christmas. Your daddy loves you so, so much. Morgan pulls back and lays a gentle hand on his chin. I think something's wrong with you, Daddy, she says solemnly. What do you mean? He gasps, startled to hear his deepest fear out of the mouth of his darling babe. You really don't remember Petey? I don't. He doesn't have a clue what she's talking about, but it's important, and he resolves to listen, even though the name makes him feel even worse somehow. Can you tell me about him? Morgan stares intently at him for a few seconds, then shrieks, I can show you! She squirms out of his grasp and darts across the garage, even though she's not supposed to be in the lab at all. Careful, he scolds, but she bypasses anything expensive or dangerous and grabs a picture frame from a counter that he can never bring himself to use. Look! She shoves the photo in his hands. It's a picture of him wearing dark glasses and a blazer over a t-shirt, one arm nonsensically thrown out in a peace sign and the other pointing to nothing. The half-obscured logo behind him means he's in the lobby of Stark Industries. There's absolutely no reason he should have taken this picture, and even less cause for him to have framed it. Morgan. There he is, she points to the empty space beside him. Petey is just as invisible as any imaginary friend. This is just a picture of me, Morgana. No, it's not. That's dumb. Why would you print out a picture of you? Okay, fair point. You used to keep this photo in the kitchen. Sometimes you'd pick it up when you were doing dishes, and you'd be sad because Petey was gone. If Petey is gone, how's he supposed to come to Christmas? He thinks that's what the meltdown was about, because her imaginary friend wasn't in any of her presents. That makes about as much sense as the photo, because Tony is vain, but if he wanted to look at himself, he's got servers full of more flattering photos, like all the ones from his 7 World's Sexiest Man photo shoots. But because he came back after you saved the world. It hits him like a bucket of water. Nothing's really impossible if the Infinity Stones are involved. He squints hard at the picture, but all he can see is himself, though his head seems to throb just a little more intensely. Morgan, do you have any other photos of Petey you can show me? Yeah. She runs off and returns a few minutes later with a stack of drawings. There. She points to a stick figure with curly brown hair and blue eyes. She's drawn him significantly taller than she's drawn herself, but they're holding hands and smiling broadly beside a blue oval that's probably the lake. It's not exactly a lot to go by. I got the eyes wrong, she admits as he moves to the next drawing. They're brown. Petey looks much the same in every drawing, always smiling, always standing beside one of the Starks. One of the pictures is clearly Morgan's interpretation of the photo she'd brought him. The curly-haired boy stands beside Tony, holding a rectangle, and they're both giving each other bunny ears. When Tony looks back at the photo, he thinks for a moment he can see a teenager beside him, but the image flickers away, and it must be his imagination. The last picture isn't like the others at all. Why are you showing me this one? He asks. He knows how she draws Iron Man, has given her tips on the right colour crayons to use and how to shape the thrusters, but he can't quite place the red and blue figure beside him. Because Petey is Spider-Man. He's worked with Spider-Man, cleaning up weapons in the city, the Thanos debacle, even brought him along for extra firepower in Germany, but the web-slinger keeps his identity close to the belt. Tony doesn't know who's under the mask. Who told you that? Morgan rolls her eyes, then fixes him with a look she definitely got from Pepper. You did. He didn't, though. He couldn't have. He doesn't know Spider-Man, doesn't know anyone named Petey. You told me all about Petey when he was gone, and now he's back and he's supposed to be here. Tony sinks into the nearest stool. I think you're right. There is something wrong with me. Morgan could be making all this up, but that wouldn't explain the photo. The photo that when he looks at it again, he's more certain than ever also contains a teenager. Most of the writing on the paper he holds is blurred, but Tony can make out the word internship. Stark Industries doesn't hire interns until their last year of college, so that only adds to the confusion. It's okay, Daddy. Morgan presses a kiss that he doesn't deserve to his cheek. We'll fix it. Maybe you just need more help remembering. She tilts her head towards the ceiling. Miss Friday, play the Christmas cookie video. Certainly, Princess Boss. A hollow screen appears over the nearest work table. The kitchen in his New York penthouse comes into focus. And why exactly are we recording this? Grouses a younger version of himself, but there's no bite in his tone. For posterity, come on, Mr. Stark, these cookies are epic. Don't you want to be able to prove to your future self that you're an exceptional baker? Tony hears the kid before he sees him, but as he's trying to wrap his head around the empty space on the screen, where clearly an exuberant child should be, said child blurs into focus. Tony's head throbs with the effort, but he doesn't let himself look away. The kid has a baby face and messy brown curls. 14, maybe 15. He wears a t-shirt sporting a science pun and a healthy spattering of floor. His eyes are brown and his grin is infectious. Yeah, sure, I think you just want to pretend that you're on that British baking show. Sorry, kid, but I can't master a convincing British accent. You watch the Great British Bake Off? No, but I've heard you ramble about it enough to get the gist. I am so rubbing off on you, Mr. Stark. Pepper hopes so, Video Tony quips. So, what comes next? First, we show off our art. Friday, zoom in, please. The angle shifts to the counter, which is covered in cookies, dozens of arc reactors and spider emblems, Iron Man and Spider-Man masks, and superhero-fired gingerbread men. They're all meticulously iced. It must have taken hours, and Tony has to admit they look pretty damn impressive. Next, the taste test. The boy, Petey apparently, picks up one of the arc reactors while Tony grabs a spider. Without discussing it beforehand, they clink them together as if making a toast, then take simultaneous bites. Petey spits the cookie into his hand. Tony manages to swallow, though from his grimace it's clear that something has gone horrifically wrong. Oh my god, that was terrible, the kid sputters. I can't believe you ate that. I blame you. Clearly you've inherited your baking skills from your aunt. Peter sticks out his tongue, but then grimaces again. Do you think maybe we switched the sugar and salt? For some incomprehensible reason, Tony laughs, clutching his arm around his stomach. That'll do it, Paula Dean. The boy stares down at the rows of inedible cookies. When he looks up, his grin returns. They still look amazing. Yeah, they do, Picasso. They're bickering about what to do next when Pepper enters the frame in a power suit and heels. God, I'd kill for a cookie. Half the board was insufferable today. Petey pales, throwing his arms out as if trying to shield the cookies from view. Tony scratches at the back of his neck. Well, about that, the cookies are more of a display piece, not for public consumption. Pepper glances between the boys. They're inedible, aren't they? Pretty much, Tony concedes. Sorry, Miss Potts, if you eat one your day will get way worse. She sighs. Emergency ice cream stash it is. It kills me you like Brucey's flavour better than mine. How do I get an ice cream flavour named after me? Asks the kid. Pepper ignores them both and pulls a pint of Ben & Jerry's from the freezer. There's a Christmas tree in the living room, she says, pointing the ice cream at Tony. A real Christmas tree. That was the Spiderling's doing. Kid told me he had never had a real Christmas tree before. Had to remedy that. Sorry, Miss Potts. Ben and May tried, my first year with them. Turns out I was super allergic. They had to take me to the ER. The kid shrugs, smiling sheepishly. Since the bite, trees don't bother me anymore, but May wasn't willing to risk it. Now, the only holiday staple the kid has to watch out for is peppermint. Don't remind me. Do you know how often people try to slip peppermint into hot chocolate in December? Yuck. A couple of days ago I took a sip of MJ's and... The video cuts off abruptly, the holoscreen disappearing. So that's why I like Christmas, Tony thinks. Huh. That's why Mommy doesn't let you help us make cookies. Morgan stares at him, her wide, bright eyes practically begging him to laugh and say that he remembered Petey after all. But Tony doesn't remember those shenanigans. He knows he's banned from the kitchen, knows he binged every damn season of that baking show shortly after the blip. But just 20 minutes ago, he wouldn't have been able to explain why. It's not just maddening, it's distressing. He feels overheated and clammy all at once. Clearly he and that kid had been close. That video was like something out of a Hallmark movie. Had he ever actually seen a Hallmark movie? But he hadn't a fucking clue why he was casually hanging out with a teenager, making cookies. It's the kind of thing Pepper and Morgan do. And the banter. That's the balance he tries to strike with Morgan, teasing but affectionate, practically dripping with affection. He's soft now, he knows this. Morgan made him so, and he has no regrets. But he wasn't soft so many years ago. Was he? Friday. Who is this kid? And for a moment he thinks something else has gone wrong in the world, because his state-of-the-art AI, which can process information 70 times faster than the human brain, hesitates. Are you joking, boss? She finally asks. I am not joking. But maybe he's dreaming. Maybe this is some kind of nightmare, all his daddy issues manifesting into a hellscape where he forgets one kid and pushes away another. Did he really wake from that coma, or is this one of the stones messing with him? Maybe it's just hell. I do not understand why you're asking me this question. You're not my therapist. I'm not looking for a psychoanalysis. Just answer it. That was Peter Parker. Friday hesitates again, which is surely a glitch in her programming. Spider-Man. So I gather you know a lot about him then? I have an entire server dedicated to him, boss, per your instructions. Karen has another. Who the hell is Karen? The AI you created for his suit. What does Karen stand for then? I believe it is a character in SpongeBob. Karen is Plankton's wife, Morgan supplies. Lordy. Tony rubs at his throbbing forehead, trying to make the pieces slot into place. He's not used to feeling so out of his depth. He can comprehend every scientific theory, but he's missing too much information here. Something's clearly messing with his brain. Pepper's too, because the video proves she also knew the kid. Somehow, Morgan's unaffected. This Peter was important to me? It would seem so. You spent thousands of hours and millions of dollars on protocols to keep him safe while patrolling. You refer to him with many familiar and complimentary nicknames, including Kid, Underoos, Rue, Future Avenger, The Best of Us, and the reason for your grey hair. After he died in your arms on Titan, you were inconsolable and unresponsive for 17 minutes. That's blunt. He should remember something like that. Christ, he should remember. There's something strange in Friday's tone, too human, like she's annoyed at him. But she can't possibly be as annoyed as Tony is at himself. There's a cavern growing in his chest, filled with all-encompassing loss. If he falls in, will he be able to claw himself out? There's also a question screaming across his brain. Why did he care so much? Why did his daughter know this random teenager? Who was Peter to him really? But Tony is a coward. He asks instead, Fry, when did I last see Peter? Peter visited you once after you woke from your coma on June 24th. Since then, you exchanged intermittent video calls and text messages until November 15th. What happened November 15th? I am not sure, but he sent you this text message. The words appeared in the air above his work table. Thanks for everything, Mr. Stark. You have no idea how much it meant to me. I'm sorry. Tony feels the words, though he doesn't know why. They hold him like a vice, squeezing his shredded, wrung-out heart that he'd spent so many years denying. What did I say? You did not respond. How could I not respond to that? He's a catastrophic fuck-up, clearly. Peter never came to Christmas because for some reason Tony ghosted him. Tony knows all about indiscretions, everything from sleeping with the wrong person to horrific, world-shattering mistakes. It didn't matter what the kid did. Tony shouldn't have abandoned him. He has to make this right. Where does Peter live? Tony recognised the address Friday gives him. That's Hogan's place. Peter and his guardian, May Parker, moved in with your forehead of security last summer. Wait a second. May Parker? Happy's May, that died in that freak Spider-Man incident. His mouth snapped shut. Shit. This whole amnesia clusterfuck aside, this kid had lost his guardian to something related to superheroing. Tony knows how much collateral damage hurts, even when the dead are just strangers. But if it's someone you love, Tony wouldn't wish that devastation on anyone. He's still surprised at how someone else's pain almost brings him to his knees. But emotion won't help here. What the kid needs, probably, is someone to look after him. First, Tony needs to find him. Then they can figure out the rest. Tony can pay for a grief counsellor or something. Friday, call up Happy. On it, boss. The phone rings 7 times before Happy picks up. What do you want? What if I was dying? Tony realises that might be a tad unreasonable, but his dread has grown with every second he waited for Happy to answer. Now it feels like the only thing in his lungs. What if I was kidnapped and I only had seconds for my head of security to pick up? Have you been kidnapped? Happy asks, with a snark of his own. No. Tony scowls. You do realise it's Christmas, right? You gave me the day off. Said you wouldn't call unless it was an emergency. He's saved by his brilliant daughter, who shouts, "Merry Christmas, Uncle Happy," into the air. Tony gives her a thumbs up, then presses a kiss to her forehead. Merry Christmas, Morgan. Hogan's voice softens to a decibel Tony hadn't thought him capable of until Morgan was born. Everything okay over there? We're looking for Petey, she says, and Tony grimaces. He wasn't going to leap right into it. May Parker, Tony says, trying to gentle his tone. He knows this is a shitty thing to ask on Christmas. Happy hadn't been dating the woman long, but he'd taken her death hard. She didn't happen to have a kid, did she? A son? Or maybe a son adjacent? Foster son? Relative she was looking after? No. All the warmth is gone from Happy's tone right now. You know she was living with me, right? Don't you think I would have mentioned if I had some kid staying with me? One would think. Apparently, whatever's made Tony and Pepper forget had affected Hogan too. He's not sure why Morgan's immune. You're absolutely sure then? What the hell is this about, Tony? Tony thinks he should ask for more about how May died, but he can't. Not on Christmas. The kid's guardian is gone, and Happy doesn't know anything about him. That's all he really needs to know. Never mind. Have a good Christmas. He hangs up quickly and peers down at Morgan. You don't know where Peter is now, do you? She shakes her head. He's supposed to be here. We'll find him. There's always a chance the kid had a backup guardian, another relative or family friend, but the alternative seemed more likely. As much as it would suck for the kid, it might help Tony now. Friday, check for any CPS records for Peter Parker. Tony wonders if he needs to reboot her system, because once again Friday takes too long to answer. There are no current CPS records for Peter Parker. Are there former CPS records for Peter Parker? No, but there should be. What do you mean? When Peter Parker was 6, he was briefly relinquished to the foster care system of New York after his parents died, before being adopted by his aunt and uncle. I have a copy of his file in my databanks from the initial background check you had me run, but that file no longer resides in the New York CPS database. What the hell is going on here? Witness protection? Shield mind wipe? Alien intervention? Half a dozen crazy scenarios run through Tony's mind, but he doesn't have the evidence he needs to draw a conclusion. I do not know, sir. So on paper, he's just gone. What if it isn't on paper, though? What if communication stopped because Peter is gone? Dead? That last damn text certainly sounded like a goodbye. What if it was a fucking suicide note? No relatives left, overridden by guilt? It makes a terrible sort of sense. But then what? Everyone fucking forgot him out of self-preservation? Maybe Tony's mental state is frail enough to explain that, but Pepper's made of stronger stuff. Happy too. And surely if Peter was dead, they would have told Morgan that instead of letting her fret. His records also appear to be missing from several other government databases. So that's it, Tony snaps. The kid is just gone, wiped off the face of the map, and we have no way to find him. Sometimes Tony still feels the arm he lost, phantom pain despite his state-of-the-art prosthesis. It's like his brain forgets the limb is gone, and when it remembers, its horror turns to agony. He finally understands why he's been such a wreck. Phantom pain, because somehow he lost a whole fucking kid. When he looks at Morgan, his brain tries to fill in the person that should have been beside her, and everything glitches. Because Peter Parker isn't just some kid. She'd called him her brother, and that tracks as much as anything does. It's honestly amazing he hasn't had more illegitimate children come out of the woodwork. He'd been careful. God had Howard lectured him about being careful, but he hadn't been that careful. How long had he known before he'd forgotten his own son? Had he made amends for his absence? The kid still calls him Mr. Stark, for Christ's sakes. They couldn't have been as close as they should have been. He'll fix that. As soon as he finds the kid, he'll fix it. Just as long as he's still alive. If he's not, if that's Tony's fault, Christmas will definitely be ruined forever. I did not say that, boss. There are trackers in both of the Spider-Man suits you gave him. Although Karen is not currently online, I can activate the baby monitor protocol and determine a location. Tony remembers to breathe. Could have led with that, dear. Get me a location. Both suits ping at the same Midtown address, just a couple of blocks from Rockefeller Center. Friday shows them an image of a run-down apartment building. Petey lives there? Morgan asks, her voice betraying the same horror that Tony feels. The place looks like a strong wind would knock it down. But at least if Peter moved the suits there, he's probably still breathing. Not for long, Tony stands and settles Morgan back on her feet. I'm gonna go get him. We'll be back before dinner. I wanna come. That's not a great idea. Why? She whines. Truthfully, Tony doesn't know. It's just the kind of thing a parent should say. The building looks shady at best, and he has no idea what state he'll find the kid in. Plus, driving all around New York looking for some mystery teenager hardly sounds like the perfect Christmas. Morgan should be safe at home playing with all her new toys. I want to help. I'm the one who told you Petey was missing. If you leave me here, you may forget again. I don't know, Morgana. Something strange is going on here. Please, Daddy? He has always been weak to those two words. He knows he's been failing her for months. Maybe if he keeps her close now, he can make up for it. All right. Yes, our own Christmas adventure. Oh, we should dress up. You can be Santa and I'll be Max. Then no one with the camera will know it's us. He hates that his 6-year-old daughter knows anything about the paparazzi. He and Pepper have shielded her plenty, raising her alone in the woods, but sometimes they do go back to the city. But he's not about to explain how sunglasses and a baseball cap are different than a Santa costume. It's not a terrible idea. Instead of blending in, they'll stand out. But anyone who notices will think they're just two more crazies in New York, and probably won't look any closer than that. All right, you go get dressed. I need to figure out what to tell your mother. At least the costumes are cute. That's the only good thing Tony has to say as they trek up 5 flights of stairs, because of course this pain-in-the-ass kid lives on the top floor where there's no elevator. Pepper had wanted to dress up this year, something about outdoing her older sister and a friend from high school. Tony had whined the requisite amount, but his wife was a saint and he wanted Morgan to think of him as the fun dad. Morgan was supposed to be an elf, but she'd taken one look at the cute little green dress and curled-toed shoes and screeched that she wanted to be the raggedy dog from The Grinch. She did look adorable, with the floppy ears and the antler headband. Tony is too young and too handsome for most Santa suits, but Friday had found him a red leather jacket and matching pants that had a Springsteen vibe, which he didn't entirely hate. Everything else about this day, though, not a fan. How is it not illegal not to have an elevator? He mutters. Morgan had insisted he carry her after the first flight of stairs, and his bum ticker is reminding him that he's not nearly as young as he used to be. He practically collapses against Peter's door, closing his eyes and trying to catch his breath. He starts to say, "We need a game plan," but Morgan steamrolls right through his practicality and shouts, "Merry Christmas, Petey! We're here to take you home!" Which, well, Tony used to cut right to the point, once. He wonders if the forgetting works both ways. If the door is going to burst open and reveal an utterly confused teen, ready to call the cops on the lunatics causing a scene outside his apartment. Morgan leans forward and bangs on the door with her little fist. "Petey, let us in!" "Mr. Parker, we just want a word," Tony tries. "You don't have to come with us if you don't want to." "But you can't stay here," he finishes in his head. Honestly, he might buy everyone who lives in this building their very own apartment, far the hell away from here. The hallway emanates a pungent mix of mould and cats, despite the sign forbidding pets tacked up in the lobby. When there's still no response, Tony tries the door. Surprisingly, it swings open. So, breaking and entering then. Clearly no one is willing to walk all those stairs to commit a robbery. Once he steps inside, he sees that the lock is broken. Where's all Petey's stuff? At first, Tony thinks the kid had been robbed, but then he thinks of Harry Potter, living in the cupboard under the stairs. What wretched aunt and uncle have resigned him to this place? Everything about the dingy shoebox screams sad, particularly the almost complete lack of personal belongings. Tony is overwhelmed by the strongest urge to buy him everything, though he doesn't know what a teenage boy would like nowadays. Somehow he thinks a stack of Playboys and a trip to Ibiza won't cut it. "Where's Petey?" he asks. There's not many corners to check around. The kid isn't here. Everyone should have plans on Christmas, but there's nothing in this apartment that hints that its occupant has anyone to have plans with. The whole place bums him out, like those infomercials about neglecting animals set to a Sarah McLachlan song. He'd once been so drunk that he called the number and donated $1 million and asked them to build a shelter in his mother's name. He'd give this kid more than $1 million. He taps his watch so Friday can hear him. "Friday, can you tell me where May Parker is buried?" Peter used to love Christmas. He's afraid he might never enjoy it again, because Christmas is about family, traditions, shared memories. Movie nights with cookies and hot chocolate, curled up on the couch watching It's a Wonderful Life for the 100th time. Worrying if people will like the gift you gave them, then watching them smile after they open it and knowing that you nailed it. When you're alone in the world, Christmas is kind of a bummer. There's no one to open your gifts, no one to laugh about the time May burned the Brussels sprouts so bad the fire department showed up. No one to brush your hair away from your forehead when you doze off against their shoulder. No one to say, "I love you," or even "Merry Christmas." Not even any Christmas movies to watch, because all the streaming logins Mr. Stark set up for you, which he paid for all 5 years you were blipped out of existence, were disconnected when your name got wiped out of every database and social media platform. Peter tried to stay in the holiday spirit, because May loved Christmas, and May wouldn't want him to wallow. But as December passed, it got harder and harder to muster up any enthusiasm. He goes patrolling Christmas morning, but the city is quiet. He checks on some of the alleys where he knows the homeless gather, making sure they're all right and encouraging them to go to feast for a warm Christmas meal, even if they don't want to spend the night. It makes him feel slightly better, until a man asks if he'll be there too. He's desperate for a warm home-cooked meal, but he can't take food from someone who needs it more, and he hadn't set foot in Feast since May died. He knows all the employees and volunteers there, and knows they would help a downtrodden teen in a heartbeat, but they do it with a glassy-eyed unfamiliarity that would break him just a little bit more, and all his cells are already about to burst apart. He can't go back as Spider-Man either. They know he's the reason May died. "Oh no, I couldn't," he stammers. "Big plans for later today." "Of course," the man says, offering him a smile. "You go on home to your family now, Spidey. We're okay." Peter stumbles away to an abandoned alley and cries for 10 minutes straight, his masked face buried in his knees. The man is right, of course. He should be spending Christmas with his family. Eventually, he makes it back to his apartment, where he changes into his threadbare jeans and ragged sweater, and then walks several miles to the cemetery. By the time he gets there, his fingers feel frozen around the gift in his hands, despite his gloves. He surveys the line of headstones. 4 Parkers doomed by their association to a person who no longer exists. It's May's stone he slumps down next to. "Brought you a present," he says, trying to keep his voice light, but it's no use. She'd see right through him if she was here. But she isn't. He sets the metal and plastic tree beside him. He'd welded it together, pulling scraps out of dumpsters. When he presses a button, it spins on its base, the lights twinkling. The lights will come on automatically when it gets dark, and it's got a little solar panel so it shouldn't run out of juice, he explains. He wonders what Happy will think when he sees it, if he looks closely enough to see the love Peter poured into it despite his humble materials, or if he'll grumble about kids leaving trash as he tosses it out. There's a huge poinsettia by her grave that doesn't even look frostbitten yet, so Happy must have been here recently. Peter hopes that means his tree will get to stay for a few days before Happy comes back. May always loved Christmas lights. He wants to leave some to watch over her. I'm not doing so hot, May, he admits, closing his eyes so it's easier to pretend that she's here. Christmas doesn't feel very merry. It takes everything in him not to start venting about his shady landlord and his shitty apartment, and how unseasonably cold it's been, and how someone had ripped out all the answers in his second-hand GED study guide. He doesn't want May to worry about him, although if she is up there somewhere, looking down on him, then she's already worried. I didn't get to watch It's a Wonderful Life this year, he says instead. It had been Ben's favourite movie, and he'd made the whole family watch it together every Christmas Eve. Ben lived his life like George Bailey, willing to give the shirt off his back of all the money he saved for his honeymoon to absolutely anyone in need, whether he knew them or not. Peter had found the movie long and boring when he was little, but he gets it now. He also understands how awful George felt when everything fell apart. I could really use a guardian angel. I'd even take Clarence. His chuckle is too harsh. He feels the tears roll down his cheeks, hot against his cold skin. 6 weeks he's been alone, and already he's cracking up. How is he supposed to live the rest of his life like this? Petey! Peter's head jerks up as something streaks towards him, but his tingle is silent. Frozen, maybe. He recognises Morgan 3 seconds before she crashes into him, her arms looping around his neck. You're cold, she complains. She's wearing brown floppy dog ears and an antler headband, and the tip of her nose is painted black. Peter thinks he may be having some sort of mental breakdown. And this is a dumb place to spend Christmas. You're supposed to be at my house. Is all he can manage. He pinches his leg, but nothing changes. He doesn't feel it much, though, because of the cold. Maybe that's what this is, some sort of hallucination as he freezes to death. If he's going to go into hibernation, it wouldn't be so bad if Morgan's face was the last he saw, even if she is pouting. Daddy and I had to drive all over the city to look for you. Peter's stomach drops, like he's just plummeted off a building and he's waiting for his web to catch. You do seem awfully chummy with my daughter, random cemetery hobo guy. Peter clutches Morgan to his chest and stumbles upright, spinning toward the voice. Tony Stark is wearing some sort of leather Santa suit, the jacket open over a Led Zeppelin t-shirt. Peter doesn't know how to interpret his expression, but it seems somewhere on the unhand my child spectrum. I'm not a hobo, he says, entirely unhelpful. What are you wearing? Am I dying? Hopefully not while you're holding my daughter. The lack of recognition in Tony's eyes cuts like a knife, but he's being extraordinarily tolerant considering that Morgan's involved. What Peter can't figure is why Morgan's involved, why the Starks came to look for him at all. Sorry, sir. He tries to set Morgan down, but she stays clutched around his neck. You need to let go, Mo. Go stand with your dad. I can't. I'm sticky just like you. What? He yelps. Morgan shouldn't know anything about him, let alone that. Cat's out of the bag, Spidey. I'm trusting, one hero to another, that the kid my kid is inexplicably obsessed with is not a total creep. Though I do have questions. Lots of questions. I need you to come with me. Are you kidnapping me? Peter cannot fathom what's going on. He must be in worse shape than he thought, because his brain is dragging like a hard drive that's about to crash. Do you want to spend the rest of your Christmas in a cemetery? Peter knows the answer should be yes. All his family in the world is right here, and he should spend holiday with them. The Starks are safer if they stay far away from him. Peter deserves to freeze here, miserable and alone. But Peter is so tired. He doesn't want to fight anymore, so he doesn't say anything at all. He just shakes his head. Great. Car's this way. Morgana, do you want to get down now? No, I'm fine. Tony shrugs. Madam Secretary has spoken. Peter freezes as Mr. Stark steps closer enough to grab the bottom of one of Morgan's fake ears with his vibranium hand and tweak her on the nose with it. There are wrinkles at the corner of his eyes. For some reason that shocks Peter more than the scars from the radiation. This isn't Beck or some other psycho then. Peter doesn't think they'd make Mr. Stark look so... old. Lordy, your lips are blue. He sounds just the same though, and it's like a dirty bomb goes off in Peter's chest. All he wants is for Mr. Stark to know him, to wrap him in his arms and tell him everything is going to be all right. Mr. Stark could fix anything he puts his mind to. But here he is, just out of reach, not even knowing that Peter is broken. It's cold, Peter says, hoping that'll explain the waver in his voice. Spiders can't thermoregulate. Wait, are you part spider? I thought that was just branding. God, the spell was thorough. The shards burrow deeper into his heart and lungs until it's agony to breathe. He fears the wounds will never heal, not without an arc reactor to draw out all the shrapnel. It's not just branding, he manages. Fascinating, Mr. Stark purrs from behind his sunglasses. We are so going to talk about that later. Let's hit the road first. There's hot chocolate and cookies in the back. Chapter 2. Peter knows the third cookie is a mistake. Added sugars aren't in his budget, and he has to watch everything he puts in his angry, shrunken stomach nowadays. But chocolate chip cookies are his weakness, the only baked goods May consistently managed not to burn. And Mr. Stark's designer thermos kept the hot chocolate blissfully warm, even though he must have made it hours ago. The rich liquid makes Peter queasy, but it feels heavenly as he sips it, and tastes so damn good that he doesn't stop until the container is empty. Afterwards, there's nothing to do but try not to be sick as he waits for the barrage of questions he knows he deserves. He has a few of his own. Primarily, what the hell is going on here? And, why is Morgan obsessed with a boy she barely knew and shouldn't remember? But for some reason Mr. Stark is showing uncharacteristic restraint. He stays quiet as he drives, though Peter watches his eyes flick frequently to the rearview mirror, probably to make sure his daughter is safe with the stranger in the back seat. Morgan had insisted on sitting next to Peter. If not for the car seat Mr. Stark had strapped her into, Peter thinks she might have curled up in his lap, which would have been shocking even without the memory spell, considering they'd only met twice. Apparently no one ever taught her restraint. She chatters the entire drive, telling Peter about what she learns in school and who her friends are, and each and every present she's gotten for Christmas. He hums occasionally to make her think he's listening, but most of her words go right over his head. Thankfully, she doesn't seem to notice. Miss Potts is waiting for them when they pull up to the cabin, arms crossed tightly over her festive red sweater. She's wearing an expression meant to make board members quail, and Peter has a terrible moment when he thinks he's going to be sick right on the Starks' front lawn. "I see you've found Morgan's imaginary friend," she says. "I never said Petey was imaginary," Morgan shrieks as she tugs Peter towards the door, but Peter digs in his heels and stays put, watching Mr. Stark for cues. Mr. Stark rubs at the back of his neck, his elevated pulse and tentative expression both ratcheting up Peter's anxiety. "Fry was supposed to fill you in on the situation." "Oh, she filled me in all right, meaning she showed me several incomprehensibly domestic videos that I have no recollection of being part of. Does anyone want to explain why?" Mr. Stark shrugs. "I don't know why we can't remember." "You don't know?" Miss Potts echoes incredulously. "Well, there's a Christmas miracle. I don't think I've ever heard you say those words before." "I can explain," Peter offers, unable to stand watching them fight on his behalf. "Not today." "Not today?" Peter and Pepper ask at once. Then they look at each other, unlikely allies in their shared disbelief. Mr. Stark steps closer and grips Peter's shoulder, not painfully or gingerly, but a good, solid, comforting grip. It takes everything inside Peter to avoid leaning into the contact. Look at the kid. Whatever happened to him wasn't very Christmassy. No need to dredge up all that trauma when we're supposed to be celebrating. We'll figure it out on Boxing Day. Peter has never known Mr. Stark to ignore his curiosity. He feels tears sting in his eyes that such a gesture is meant for him. Miss Potts uncrosses her arms. Her look softens until it's almost a smile. All right, because it's Christmas, but I do expect an explanation. Don't worry, Pep, so do I. Mr. Stark squeezes Peter's shoulder, then guides him gently toward the door. But first, we're making merry. As Peter stumbles across the threshold, he still thinks he might be dreaming. He just can't tell if it's a nightmare. Miss Potts informs them all in a pointed voice that there will be a few hours until dinner, since she didn't know when they'd be back. Mr. Stark ushers him and Morgan to the living room to wait. So, what's your favourite Christmas movie, Pete? The question is friendly and harmless, but Peter thinks of a particular lab session where he'd rambled through the merits of every Christmas movie he'd ever seen, while Mr. Stark judged his commentary. The man should know the answer. Peter knows his anger is unfair and unjustified, but once it fades he's just sad, and that's somehow worse. He remembers how he felt about It's a Wonderful Life at Morgan's age, and he won't put her through that. Elf, he answers instead. Morgan cheers, and he knows that he made a good choice. Even though this is the first Christmas since he was 6 that he hasn't re-watched the saga of George Bailey, he's not sure he has the emotional bandwidth for anything heavy right now. When Mr. Stark drops a fluffy blanket into Peter's lap after asking Friday to start the movie, Peter looks up at him with a raised eyebrow. You still look like a popsicle, Frosty. He needs Dr. Stuffy, Morgan says as she sits down next to Peter and claims part of his blanket. He's not used to anyone being so close, but when she stares up at him with her big eyes and grins like she's so damn happy to see him, he just melts like the snowman. He stretches out his arms and lets her snuggle under it, and she giggles into his chest. Great idea, Morgana. Mr. Stark disappears and returns a few minutes later with a stuffed purple hippo, which he nonsensically hands to Peter. The toy is warm and smells strongly of lavender. Did you put this in the microwave? Yep. That's a thing now. You're supposed to snuggle it, Morgan instructs, pushing it against his chest. Peter feels foolish, but damn if the toy doesn't warm him up fast. It's also incredibly soft, by far the nicest thing he's felt in a long time. He tries to watch the movie, needing to laugh to prove he still can, but his eyes drift closed before Buddy leaves for New York. You're working yourself too hard, baby. Christmas Day and you can't even stay awake until dinner. The fingers combing through his hair are gentle. The voice, familiar. Leave him be, Mayday. He needs to rest up for the big interview. That voice, also familiar, but gone so long he never thought he'd hear it again, makes Peter open his eyes. Everything is blurry, but May and Ben hover above him. May seems younger than she ought to be, Ben older than he'd ever been. Ben presses something into Peter's hand. Took those off when you passed out halfway through the movie. Didn't want you breaking them again. As his fingers close over the plastic, Peter realises they're his glasses. Everything sharpens when he puts them on. He can't hear May or Ben's heartbeats, but they smile at him like they're still alive. Ben's been gone so long, Peter's forgotten how effortlessly his aunt and uncle used to move around each other, always in the same orbit. He wonders how long it'll take until he forgets May's mannerisms. You're here, he stammers, reaching out to grab May's hand, which is still buried in his curls. His voice sounds strange, too low. He pulls her hand away from his head and links their fingers together. We're always here, sweetie, she says. He can't see any grey in her hair, not even at the roots. You're the one who left for MIT, but we're glad you're spending your entire break with us, even if it's mostly an excuse to be in town for your interview. Which you're gonna nail, Buddy, no doubt about that. There's plenty of doubt, Peter says, surprised to find that he knows what they're talking about. There's a dozen finalists, and he's only going to take one personal intern. But how many failed to make that top dozen, May says. And you were so nervous about your September Foundation application, and that was accepted. Yeah, but SI funds tons of September Foundation projects. Interning with Tony Stark is next level. I wouldn't just be working on something on my own. I'd be learning from the man who practically invented nanotechnology. He'd be a fool not to pick you, Ben says, squeezing Peter's shoulder. No one's smarter or scrappier or more dedicated than you. But if he doesn't see that, that doesn't change anything about how amazing you are, or how much we love you. I know, Peter says, blushing a bit as he ducks his head. Geez, I go off to college for a few years and you all get sappy. 4 years. 4 years you've been gone, May laments. And if a job at SI means you come back to New York for good after you finish your masters, then maybe I'll have to rethink my stance on Tony Stark. Peter and Ben groan simultaneously. That's old news, honey. Yeah, Mr. Stark hasn't done anything scandalous since he got married. It's been like 10 years. He's totally an upstanding citizen now. Sure, but that marriage was the biggest scandal of all. It may seem like he's been faithful, and he did basically give her the company, but marrying his personal assistant, that's a big HR no-no. We still have to do annual trainings at the hospital about how dating your boss might seem like a fairy tale, but it will get you both fired. I wouldn't be surprised if the tabloids were right and he did give his father that heart attack. Peter rolls his eyes. Don't worry, MJ has explained at length how that's a gross abuse of power. I won't take dating advice from the man, but engineering advice. May drops down next to him on the couch and pulls him into an awkward hug. All right. Anything that keeps you here, even Tony Stark. And Peter holds her tight, even though he was home for Thanksgiving, and she's hugged him at least a dozen times since he got back on the 22nd. She jokes about how tight he clutches her, but he doesn't worry about breaking her ribs. But his nose scrunches as something pokes at his cheek. When he opens his eyes, May is gone, and he's staring at Morgan Stark. You snore, she says, poking him a few more times for good measure. Even if so, it takes him a while to realise it was just a dream. He can still feel May's arms around him, smell the perfume she'd stopped wearing after Ben died. But they were both gone, and his mind was just trying to cope. At least this was better than the nightmares where he watched them die over and over. Probably. No blood, no viscera, no final weighty words and expectations he can never live up to. But this fantasy he created where they are both alive and happy leaves behind an ache so profound that it takes everything inside him not to break down. They could have had that. They should have. But they're gone. And Peter is alone. Morgan, bless her, is immune to his inner turmoil. You missed the rest of the movie. But now you're up, you can open your presents. Mr. Stark clears his throat. Morgana, honey, I didn't know Peter was coming. We can get him some presents tomorrow, but I don't have anything for him now. You don't have to do that, Peter tries to say, wishing he was back in the graveyard where he wasn't a bother, but Morgan cuts him off. There's a pile of presents for Petey in the guest room closet, where Mummy keeps the extra candy. Sometimes you go in there and cry when you're supposed to be in the garage. When their eyes meet over Morgan's head, Mr. Stark looks just as alarmed as Peter feels. I don't think that happened. That's a lie, just like Santa Claus. Morgan slides off the couch and grabs Peter's hand. The closet in the guest room is indeed filled with presents, wrapped in at least 5 different papers. There is red and gold plaid and blue and red stripes, plus the licensed Star Wars stuff that Peter knows cost extra because May stopped buying it after Ben died. But what really punches him in the gut is the bright red paper with the spider emblems that look hand-drawn. I did not know these were in here, Tony says, scratching at the back of his neck. Dig in, I guess. Every single package says, To Peter, love Tony. Not from, but love, making Peter wonder if he's still dreaming. He has never gotten so many presents at once. He's not sure he's gotten this many presents collectively in his entire life. When Morgan presses a box into his hand, he opens it, because he doesn't know what else to do. The gifts range from inappropriately expensive to uncomfortably sentimental. He opens a Millennium Falcon Lego set signed by Harrison freaking Ford and reservations for the Starks, Peter and Ned at the new Disney Star Wars hotel, but also the MIT sweatshirt he'd borrowed from Mr. Stark whenever he got a cold in the lab, and a Kishi souvenir snow globe of Spider-Man hanging upside down on the Rockefeller Christmas tree. "We miss you, Spidey," carved into its base. He opens a new laptop, a Stark pad, a Stark phone, and a frankly insulting number of backpacks. Morgan offers complimentaries on each gift, but Mr. Stark is silent, and Peter just can't bring himself to look at him. He feels absolutely numb. This is not his life, not anymore. But it never was. Mr. Stark gave him a couple of suits, yes. He was generous in a casual way, buying pizza and lab equipment, and even clothing or school supplies whenever he noticed Peter was in need. But it was never premeditated. Mr. Stark was allergic to sentiment. He'd said so more than once. This closet is a shrine, except the boy it memorialised never existed at all. The next box Peter grabs is small and wrapped in the paper with the hand-drawn spiders. It's too light to be a book, though it's almost the right shape. He unwraps it carefully, sliding a finger under the tape instead of just ripping the paper apart. All he can think of is how long Mr. Stark must have spent with the Sharpie, doodling Peter's emblem. The paper is such high quality that no ink bled through to the box it covered. Peter opens it and finds a few pieces of paper, folded hamburger style. "Dear Peter," it reads. Mr. Stark hadn't called him that. Almost never. It was always nicknames and Kid and Pete, and sometimes Mr. Parker if Pepper was scowling at him. Peter never thought his name was that exceptional, though he'd give anything to have people know it now. But this, two simple words make him want to run. The paper feels heavy in his hands, and he knows he might crumble under the weight of it. But he's curious too, and for the first time in weeks, and he can't make himself put it down. "Merry Christmas, kid. Morgan's 4 now, and since this is the first Christmas she might remember, Pep and I went all out. Gigantic tree, decorations everywhere, and the presents. So many presents. We spent hours putting everything together, and now it's 3 a.m, and I should be passed out like Pepper because my little menace is going to be up at 6, ready to tear through everything. But instead I'm hiding in the lab, thinking about how you would have been such a big help, how you would have put on one of those silly green hats with the pointed elf ears and helped me eat the cookies we left for Santa, and you definitely wouldn't have sworn at the miniature kitchen set until Pepper told you to knock it off and just follow the instructions. You would have insisted on climbing on the roof to shake jingle bells and gone out in the dark to leave reindeer footprints in the snow. You would have been so damn excited about everything, and thinking of that made me realise I'm just going through the motions. I'm doing all I can to make Christmas amazing, and yet all I want is you. I missed you, kid. God, I miss you so much. Every time I think I get a handle on it, Morgan does something adorable, and I want to reach for my phone to text you about it, and then I realise again that you're gone, and it hurts. You would have been an awesome big brother, I know it. You would have been so good with Morgan. I wish more than anything that I gotten to see that. Sometimes I dream about the two of you, together. I always wake up crying. Yeah, shocking, right? The Tin Man has a heart. I know, turns out I do. The worst part is that heart knows how much I fucked up, now. It regrets every damn day. There were so many things I never told you when you were alive, and now all I can do is write this letter like some teenage girl confessing her first crush to her diary. I was terrified to get too close to you, not because I thought I was going to lose you. I should have worried about that more clearly. I should have put walls around my heart and run in the other direction. I don't mean that. I can't mean that, much as I want to. I thought I was going to fuck you up. You deserve better than me. You knew that from the moment you gave that responsibility speech, the day I recruited you to fight a bunch of my superpowered friends. You were worried about homework, and I steamrolled you right into a fight I had no business bringing you to, because I was selfish and all I could think about was my own problems. But I knew you deserved better than that, so I tried to keep my distance, but that didn't work out, and you almost got killed cleaning up my mess, so I figured maybe I could help you in a hands-off kind of way. Ha! I overestimated my ability to resist your charms, clearly, because lab days turned into movie nights, and I have no fucking clue how my highlight of every week became hanging out with a teenager. But there we go. Maybe because it was so clear that you wanted to be there, that you didn't care about my money or my fame. Sometimes it seemed you didn't even care about my genius, that you cared most about me. And I cared right back. Not just cared. I didn't understand until you were gone. Till all the light and humour and joy and goodness and brilliance had been sucked right out of my life. It wasn't until Morgan was born that I realised I loved you. A sob tears out of Peter's throat as the letter crinkles and rips beneath his hands. It isn't fair. It's like losing Mr. Stark all over again. He's back on that battlefield, and once again it's Peter's fault. Parker luck and god-awful timing. He'd never dared to think that Mr. Stark had cared so deeply. Now he knows he loved him, but it's too late, because those memories are gone, stolen because Peter was foolish and selfish and asked Doctor Strange to magic away his troubles. If Peter had just been better, if he'd never given Edith to Beck, or just lived with the repercussions of his actions instead of going to Strange for help, then maybe Mr. Stark would have said all this to his face, instead of in a letter covered in suspicious water stains. May would still be here, but even if she wasn't... But he can't think about that. He can't stay here, even on the off chance that Mr. Stark would let him. It would just be curiosity that drove his interest, or Morgan's insistence, which might just be Mr. Stark's curiosity in a cuter form. Maybe Peter could have lived with that 10 minutes ago out of desperation, but he won't be able to bear Mr. Stark looking at him with pity or curiosity when he should be looking at him with love. Not that he can fathom Mr. Stark looking at him with love either. Maybe if Mr. Stark had found him sooner, Peter might have earned that love again, but he's not the bright and energetic mentee he once was, desperate to prove himself, almost smart enough to keep up, and always eager to test something new. Loss has made him dull and numb, and he needs every bit of energy just to survive. There's nothing left to be clever or sassy. Every second of every day Peter is starving. For food, for attention, for a kind word or a gentle touch, or acknowledgement that he's trying, he's always trying, for a way to make it up to May, that he failed her so completely. The last thing Mr. Stark needs is someone who can only take, just another sycophant. Mr. Stark could never love the pathetic failure he's become. Peter might have endured that if he never expected him to, but now that he knows what he might have been, he won't survive the constant comparisons. He scrambles upright, already calculating how far he'll be able to run before he collapses. They're too damn far into the middle of nowhere. "I'm sorry, sir, I'm sorry. I don't want to go, but I can't stay here, Mr. Stark. I just can't. I'm sorry." Peter's ready to dart out of the door, but Mr. Stark just drops, straight down to his knees. His heart races too fast and arrhythmic, and Peter can only be glad that it hasn't slowed. "Oh my God!" Peter drops down beside Mr. Stark. "What's happening? Your heart's going crazy and you're not breathing right. Do you need an ambulance? Do you need pepper? Oh my God, Friday, call someone." "Cancel that, Fry." Mr. Stark's hands clamp around Peter's shoulders. "Don't you dare run out on me, Underoos. I will chase you across this whole damn state if I have to. The whole damn world." Mr. Stark's intensity takes Peter aback, distracting his dulled mind for a few long seconds before realisation strikes. He'd sink to his knees if he wasn't already there. "What did you call me?" "Underoos, Rue, Kid, Spider Baby, Padawan, reason for all my grey hair. Take your pick, I've got 1,000,000 of them." "I think most of that grey hair is Morgan's doing." Peter snaps his mouth shut, unsure where that came from. The look on Mr. Stark's face changes, no less intense but softer somehow. He knows hope will kill him, but Peter can't stop it. "What do you remember?" he whispers. "Everything." And then Mr. Stark pulls Peter forward into his chest and begins to rock them both back and forth. Relief crashes over Peter like a wave, displacing the pain. He holds on for dear life, thinking he might drown if he ever lets go. The arm shaking across his back is rough, but the hand cradling his head is so gentle. "Oh, Tesoro, how the fuck could I ever forget about you?" "That's $5 for the swear jar." Mr. Stark shifts so that one arm clutches Peter to his side and the other stretches out to his daughter. "Come here, Bambina. "Oh, Princess, you just saved Christmas. MVP of the Stark family, hands down. You brought your brother home, you brilliant girl." She races into her father's arms. "Finally!" Mr. Stark laughs, placing a lingering kiss to her temple. Peter isn't expecting it when his mentor shifts and kisses him too, but warmth blooms inside him at the affection. He doesn't know how this is possible, but for once he doesn't give in to his rambling thoughts. He lets himself be held and believes that everything could be okay. Peter thinks, from the strange hitch in Mr. Stark's breath, that he might be crying. "I finally got both my kids in my arms. Best Christmas present ever." Peter doesn't know what to say to that, so he doesn't say anything at all, just presses himself harder against Mr. Stark, his whole body buzzing with the contact after so long on his own. He's not sure how much time passes before Miss Potts finds them. Her eyebrows raise at the sight of her family huddled on the floor, clutching a strange teenager amidst a pile of presents. "Is everything okay in here?" she asks, calmer than the situation probably warrants. "Everything's perfect," Mr. Stark says, pulling Peter and Morgan both a bit tighter into his sides. Miss Potts scrutinises them like she's evaluating a business proposal. There must be something she finds worthy, because her expression softens. "Dinner's ready." As Mr. Stark walks by her toward the dining room, Peter hears her whisper, "There better be quite the explanation." Every bite is heaven. Peter hasn't had a home-cooked holiday meal in years. Ben had always been the one to cook the turkey, mash the potatoes, roast the vegetables. May had tried, the first Thanksgiving after Ben died. It had been an absolute disaster. While May could usually brush off her tragedies in the kitchen, this one had stung. They'd ordered a take-out Christmas feast that year, but it had been overpriced and underwhelming. They'd stuck with Thai take-out every holiday since. This Thanksgiving, Peter had bought 2 portions and ate them both beside May's grave. There hadn't been enough money for that today. He'd expected to eat instant ramen for dinner. But apparently Miss Potts is a genius in the kitchen, amidst all her other talents. Peter takes a spoonful of everything, savouring the warmth, the taste, the quality of the ingredients. He'd never had sweet potatoes before, but they're delightful. "Oh wow, Miss Potts, everything is great!" He grins at her, and finds he can't stop. "Thank you, Peter. That's very kind." "It's Mrs. Stark now, kid. I finally put a ring on it years ago." Tony's grinning too, his happiness infectious. Crowded around this little table with its red tablecloth and tasteful pine centrepiece and tacky holiday Avengers placemats, Peter feels like he's part of the family again. "But eat up, don't be shy. There's plenty of food and I know how your metabolism runs." All Peter's good feelings vanish in an instant. He contemplates trying to force down more food, but he knows that will end badly. He really doesn't want to experience this meal in reverse. And even if he gets away with it tonight, he's not going to be able to hide the truth for long. Uncomfortable honesty it is then. "Actually, I'm full." "I'm calling bullshit, kiddo. I've seen you devour an entire pizza without taking a breath. You barely filled half your plate. No way you're full." Peter wishes he and Mr. Stark were alone to have this conversation. It would be even better if they weren't having it at all. Everyone's looking at him and he itches under the attention. "This is the most food I've had in a while. I really don't want it to come back up." "Why haven't you been eating more? You know your healing's affected if you don't eat enough." Peter looks down at his plate to escape Mr. Stark's frowny disappointment. "Food is expensive." Tony makes those sounds somewhere between a choke and a gasp. "That's the worst thing I've ever heard." "Tony!" Mrs. Stark hisses. She turns to Peter. He expects pity, but her smile is kind, although a bit strained. "Please excuse my husband for being an insensitive ass. The leftovers will be in the fridge. You're welcome to them whenever you get hungry again." "Thanks." Shame burns like stomach acid, and he doesn't look at Mr. Stark for the rest of the meal. When it's time for dessert, he asks for pumpkin pie, thinking he's digested enough to manage it. Mr. Stark practically jogs into the kitchen, and Peter assumes he wants to escape the awkwardness that even Morgan seems to be picking up on. 2 minutes later, he returns with the slither of pie, cinnamon sprinkled over the whipped cream just the way Peter likes it. Peter figures it's the only apology he's going to get. At least it tastes great, and he needs the calories. Peter volunteers to do the dishes, shaking off Mr. and Mrs. Stark's insistence that he's their guest and needn't bother. It's the least he can do, and he really doesn't mind, but honestly, what he needs most is some time alone. He doesn't expect Mr. Stark to follow him into the kitchen. Surely Iron Man doesn't do dishes. But when Peter reaches for the faucet, Mr. Stark stops him. It's a casual gesture, Mr. Stark's calloused hand covering Peter's and gently pushing it away, but Peter freezes. Kind touch has become such a rarity. His skin buzzes and he knows he should pull away. He's still mad. At himself, at Mr. Stark, at the world. But he could stay right in this awkward moment forever and still be happier than he's been in 6 weeks. "I'm sorry," Mr. Stark says. He drops his hand and Peter shrinks back into himself. "It's okay," Peter mumbles, looking down into the sink. "It's not okay. It's so fucking far from okay that I forgot all my manners. But that's not on you." "Maybe it is." "I don't believe that for a second." Tears burn behind Peter's eyes as he wonders if that can be true. "Can we drop this? I know what I can and can't eat. I'm not, doing it on purpose." Mr. Stark blows a loud breath through his nose. "That doesn't make me any less horrified, but we'll figure it out. Helen can work up a customised nutrition plan, gradually get your calories back where they need to be." Peter's not sure he'll be around long enough for that, but agreeing is easier than arguing. "Okay." Mr. Stark squeezes his shoulder, and the few seconds of contact is everything. "Leave the dishes. Why don't you go get your MIT hoodie? We've got a little after-dinner tradition. We'll have the heat on in the car, but I know how cold you run. You should layer up." "Where are we going?" he asked, buoyed by the simple words, "I know how cold you run." "That's a surprise. Grab your sweatshirt and your coat and meet us by the front door in 5. Peter and the Starks pile into an SUV so unostentatiously that Peter suspects it might even belong to Mrs. Stark, even though Mr. Stark drives. He feels a bit ridiculous being so bundled up when Mr. Stark swears they aren't going outside. His off-brand coat is dull and tattered compared to Morgan's designer purple puffer jacket and matching pink hat and gloves. "Do you like Christmas lights, Petey?" she asks as they drive further into the middle of nowhere. "That was supposed to be a secret, little miss," Mr. Stark scolds, all sass and no bite. "Like Mommy's word shit?" Peter surprises himself with a laugh, and something loosens in his chest. "Why is that my word?" Peter can't see Mrs. Stark's face, but he can hear her raised eyebrow. "I don't know what that girl is talking about. She's delusional, clearly." "You guys are the ones who forget stuff." Morgan stretches her arm into the empty middle seat, fingers wiggling in invitation. Peter reaches out and links their hands together. "I love Christmas lights, Mo. Every year I go to see the big tree in Rockefeller Center." That tree only has 50,000 lights. We're going to see 1,000,000. 1,000,000 lights? "She's not exaggerating," said Mr. Stark. "They were on one of those light shows a couple years back." Peter sees the first lights when they're still a mile or 2 away, a glow on the horizon that grows bigger and brighter as they begin to slow. They've driven through mostly empty road for nearly half an hour, but cars start to materialise as they get closer to their destination. By the time they reach the huge arch covered in snowflakes and candy canes, they're in bumper-to-bumper traffic. But that's all right, because Peter wouldn't want them to be able to drive any faster. The place is insane. 5 minutes into the display, and he thinks 1,000,000 lights might be an undercount. They're everywhere, strung around actual pine trees and metal structures alike, strewn across the ground like a net, hanging down from wires like snow. "Whoa," Peter says, unable to be more articulate than that. "You ain't seen nothing, kid," Mr. Stark says. "There's 7 different parts to the display. The North Pole is cool and all, but it gets better. Wait till you get to Disney World. They have Elsa's Ice Castle and Ariel's Cave." That cave happens to be on Peter's side of the car. As they approach, Morgan pops out of her car seat and slides next to Peter. "Hey," Mr. Stark scolds. "You know better than to leave your seat when the car is moving." "We're barely moving, and all the good stuff is on Petey's side." Peter pulls Morgan into his lap and loops an arm around her waist like a seatbelt. "I've got her," he promises. "Fine, but only because it's Christmas. Don't do that again, Morgana." "I won't." Morgan tilts her head up and presses a kiss to Peter's cheek. Thanks, Petey. Now we better pay attention before we miss the good stuff. There is so much to take in, Peter is sure he misses most of it. The Starks tune the radio to a station that plays music that corresponds to the display. Peter divides his attention between that and Morgan's running commentary. She asks him occasionally for his opinion, but he's not particularly coherent. His clearest thought is that May would have loved this. The music isn't quite synced to their progress, so he hears a few familiar bars before he realises what is coming next. Daddy said this next part would be your favourite, Morgan says, but Elsa's castle is better. As the Imperial March swells, they drive beneath an epic space battle. Peter's breath catches at the level of detail and the sheer size of the display around them. The Death Star and the Millennium Falcon look real. There's a tribe of Ewoks, a bustling cantina where every familiar alien is wearing a Santa hat or a Christmas sweater, an animatronic Jedi, their lightsabers particularly bright as they flash across the sky. How did they even do this? Mr. Stark chuckles. Peter glances towards the front of the car and notices that Mr. Stark isn't watching the road or the display. His eyes are tilted towards the rearview mirror. There's a strange look on his face. He's pleased with himself. Definitely pleased. But there's also something soft, which isn't a word Peter associates with Mr. Stark. Just a whole lot of Christmas magic. And a rather large anonymous donation, maybe, Mrs. Stark adds. The only thing that can make this any better was if May was here to see it, but he'll give her a play-by-play the next time he visits. Morgan is right. Next to this, Rockefeller Centre is lame. But Mr. Stark is wrong. The Star Wars display isn't Peter's favourite, even though it's so awesome that Ned would probably pass out if he saw it. Because the final section, before they pass through one last twinkling arch out of this Christmas wonderland, is a tribute to superheroes. Not just the Avengers, though they're all present in their costumed glory, but even some of the vigilantes Peter encounters on the streets of New York, Daredevil and Deadpool and Johnny Storm. Somehow the lights are choreographed to look like a battle, and they're all assembling around a giant billboard that just reads, "Thank you." For a moment Peter feels like he is back outside the compound, sometime before Mr. Stark snapped, and it all suddenly hurt, when some flying, glowing lady was trading quips with him, and he realised that, damn, he was literally helping to save the world. All these heroes he'd grown up idolising were within arm's reach, and in that moment they didn't see him as a kid, but as a valuable ally. Because there in lights Iron Man blasts into the sky, while Spider-Man somersaults over him and catches on a sparkling web. And that had been real once. Peter had helped. All his pain and loss hadn't been for nothing. He's still helping, he knows. Even when the rest of his life's gone to shit, Spider-Man is still there for the little guy, taking down drug dealers and stopping muggings, and sometimes rescuing cats from trees and helping people find their lost dogs. It matters. To other people who still have lives of their own. He's a hero, damn it. And right then, it's enough. There's you and Daddy, Morgan says, pointing out the window. Though you're even better without the silly suits. Morgan's wrong, but her sincerity warms him from the inside out. He tilts his chin down to rest on her head, holds her just a little tighter, and closes his eyes. The feeling of being close to someone is overwhelming. The lights are so bright they glow behind his eyelids. For a moment, everything that's been weighing him down falls away, and he truly believes in Christmas magic. Chapter 3. By the time they return to Stark Cabin, Peter knows he's on the verge of a sensory overload. The lights had been amazing, but also overstimulating, and Morgan had talked his ear off the entire drive home, even once he'd fallen silent, trying to focus on the darkness outside his window so he doesn't freak out. When Morgan shrieks, "Can we watch another Christmas movie?" Peter isn't able to hold back his flinch. Morgan doesn't seem to notice, but he thinks Mrs. Stark does. "No can do, little miss, it's already way past bedtime." "Can Petey read me my bedtime story?" Peter wants to. He really does. He owes Morgan so much. If not for her, he might still be sitting teary-eyed and frozen in that graveyard. Instead, he's warm and fed with two whole people who somehow know his name and remember him. He doesn't know what the future will hold, but his outlook is certainly better than it was this morning. May and Ben used to read him stories. He'd love to do that for Morgan, turn the pages and make all the funny voices, and he really doesn't want to disappoint her. Not on Christmas. Not ever. But he knows how he gets when his senses are like this. One loud noise can set him off, one delighted shriek. Even if she tries to climb into his lap, it might do it. He used to have a better handle on this, but now he's not eating or sleeping enough. He's got more triggers and less control. It doesn't take much to send him into an all-out fit. He doesn't want her to see him like that. Doesn't want any of the Starks to see him like that, but especially not Morgan. She won't understand. He doesn't want to scare her or make her think that this is her fault. He's still trying to figure out how to politely decline when his stomach rumbles, mortifyingly loud. Morgan, bless her, giggles. Peter's face flames, and he shifts slightly so he can't catch even a glimpse of Mr. Stark's expression. "Sweetie, how about Peter reads to you another night?" Mrs. Stark suggests. "Sounds like he's hungry. You don't want to make him wait to eat, do you?" "No," Morgan says, though she pouts at her mother before turning to Peter. "Do you promise to read to me tomorrow night?" Peter would make that promise in a heartbeat if it was up to him, but he has no idea how long he'll be staying. He could wear out his welcome at any time. But Mrs. Stark seems to be the boss around here, and if she's telling Morgan that Peter will be around at least long enough to read to her, he doesn't think she'll kick him out until after he does. Peter kneels down so he's eye level with the little girl. "I promise, Morgan," he says solemnly. "All right," she says. "Eat a piece of pie for me, please." "You got it." Then she's running at him, and Peter opens his arms just in time to hug her properly. "Thanks, Mo," he whispers into her hair, "for coming to find me." "Family always finds each other," she says, as if it's a universal law, as indisputable as gravity. "Thanks for making this the best Christmas ever. I love you." Peter feels tears prick at his eyes. "Love you too," he says, overwhelmed by how much he means it. Eventually they disentangle. Mr. Stark takes Morgan up to bed, and Mrs. Stark offers to fix Peter a plate. "You really don't have to do that," he says as he follows her into the kitchen. He thinks she is probably the MVP of the Stark family, the way she'd managed Morgan. "I can do it." "Nonsense, you're a guest." Mrs. Stark opens the refrigerator and starts laying out containers of leftovers on the end of the island she'd instructed Peter to sit behind. He knows it's probably a bad idea to get his stomach used to extra meals that won't continue once he's back on his own, but the thought of filling his stomach with something delicious instead of going to bed hungry is so enticing that he just doesn't care. "A guest you weren't expecting. I'm sorry I crashed your Christmas." Mrs. Stark paused long enough to arch one perfectly shaped eyebrow. "Knowing my husband and daughter the way I do, I'm fairly certain they crashed your Christmas." Peter chuckles, feeling surprisingly at ease. He'd encountered Miss Potts many times, back in his intern days, but they'd never spent much time together, and never alone. This should be weird now that she knows nothing about him, and he's been suddenly inserted into her life on Christmas of all days. But it's not any weirder than anything else about today. She asks him to take what he wants, allowing him to choose the portions without drawing attention to the earlier food debacle, and he's grateful all over again. When she sticks his plate in the microwave, she cuts herself a hearty slice of pumpkin pie and adds a neat dollop of whipped cream. "This is amazing," he tells her after a few bites. His senses are already settling, the food and relative quiet of the room helping him regulate. "Thank you, Peter." "I mean it. I didn't know the great Pepper Potts could cook. Pepper Stark, I mean. Sorry, I'm not used to that." "It's all right. I still go by Pepper Potts at work. Tony just gets a bit possessive. I'm sure you've noticed." Yeah. Sometime during the years they'd known each other, Peter had gone from the kid to my kid, from the spiderling to my spiderling. Peter had known that it was just Mr. Stark taking credit for someone he'd poured so much time, money and mentoring into, but he'd been thrilled each time he heard it nevertheless. "Tony actually does most of the cooking since I'm so busy with SI. He taught himself shortly after we moved out here, since takeout options are pretty limited. Tony's always been able to learn anything he puts his mind to. He's quite good, but he does have a tendency to get distracted, or a little too creative. We both decided that for the holidays it's best if I take point on food and he takes point on wrangling Morgan. In the lab, Peter watches that creativity lead to mind-blowing discoveries, and sometimes discoveries that just blow up. That makes sense. So, you're Tony's son, right? Peter accidentally inhales the mouthful of sweet potato casserole he's chewing, and then proceeds to try and choke it back up. Mrs. Stark shoots up with surprising calm and crosses around the island, laying a hand on his shoulder. Are you all right, sweetheart? Do you need the Heimlich? Peter's traitorous, convulsing body leans into her touch, because it's so gentle, so much like May. He knows he should pull away. Instead, he focuses on not dying. No, he wheezes. I'm all right. And after another hacking cough or two, he is. Mrs. Stark removes her hand so she can push his glass of water towards him. He takes a careful sip, mourning how cold the room suddenly seems. Once Mrs. Stark is convinced he can breathe again, she settles back on her stool on the other side of the island. Mr. Stark isn't my father, he says, surprised by how hoarse his voice sounds. The eyebrow raises again, and then Mrs. Stark smiles at him. I've known Tony for a long time, long before we were ever romantically involved. I know he used to be a playboy. You don't have to shield me from anything. The truth won't make me look at you, or him, any differently. But I'm not his son, he stammers. I'm not. Mrs. Stark comes. All right, how do you know him? Because I've never known Tony to hang out with many teenagers. Peter's known an interrogation is inevitable. It's only strange that it's taken this long for someone to ask him any questions. But he feels sweat beading at the back of his neck. Somehow he thinks Mr. Stark's questions might be easier than this one. I was his intern. Tony's never had interns. He doesn't have the patience to wait for someone to catch up to him. He certainly wouldn't take on a high school intern. It started out as an informal thing. I would just help him in his lab sometimes, but it began taking up more and more time, and my aunt wanted it on record for my school, so... He trails off, then works up the courage to look her in the face. So he got you to do all the paperwork. That bit sounds like Tony, but Tony doesn't let anyone into his lab. He doesn't even like me to step in there. He and Bruce worked together once, and a murderous robot almost took over the world. I don't understand why he would let a child that wasn't his own anywhere near his precious projects. What did you work on specifically? Whatever he was working on at the time, but mostly his suits. And, mine. Panic strikes hard, like there's a bad guy standing on his chest, ready to kick him in the face. As much as he'd worried before about people finding out his identity, now it's 1,000 times worse, because he actually knows how bad that can be. But Mr. Stark's wife isn't people. Married couples aren't supposed to keep secrets from one another. May and Ben had taught him that, and if he's going to be a part of Mr. Stark and Morgan's lives, even just a tiny occasional part, then Mrs. Stark is going to want to know why. Surely she'll be there whenever this Boxing Day rolls around with questions of her own, and she's going to hear the truth. Might as well rip off this band-aid now. I'm Spider-Man. Mrs. Stark looks up and down with narrowed eyes. You're so young. I'm almost 18. He crosses his arms and tries to look imposing. Every time he's caught a glimpse of himself in a mirror since the spell, he thinks he looks older. He's pretty sure he's convinced a lot of potential employers that he's a legal adult. It's just once they ask for an ID he doesn't have that they turn him away. But Spider-Man's been active for a long time. Mr. Stark was looking out for me. Now that sounds like Tony. Her posture softens. Peter tries to relax too. I'm sorry about the drones. In London, Edith. That was a mess, and I know you had to deal with it. Edith was Tony's mess. He shouldn't have given that much firepower and responsibility to a child. I'm not a child. But you should be. Something in her tone makes Peter just stop. It's not pity. It's kinder than that. She has no reason to be so kind to him. It's better than he deserves. Look, I'm clearly missing a lot of the story here, but what I do know is that Tony and Morgan have both been out of sorts for weeks, maybe months. I think that's because they were missing you. Tony doesn't trust easily. There's very few people he lets get close to him, and there's arguably nowhere closer than his workshop. That's always been the birthplace of his genius and the outlet for his pain. If he trusts you enough to let you be part of that, and to get close to his daughter, then it doesn't matter what your story is. You'll always be welcome here." A few tears fall, although Peter manages to swallow the sob that threatens to mortify him in front of this absolute boss. "Thank you." Mrs. Stark reaches out and grabs his shoulder, rubbing at the tension there for a few seconds before she gets up and heads back to the fridge. "How about a piece of pie?" she calls over her shoulder. He eats 2 pieces of pie, 1 piece for him and 1 for Morgan, as promised, leaving him full but not uncomfortably so. It's amazing how the food fixes so many problems he's been having, allowing him to think clearer and more rationally, because he's not dizzy and distracted. He could get used to this. He shouldn't, though. Except maybe he can, he thinks as he stares at the Starks' Christmas tree, which they have nothing on the holiday display they'd visited, but is otherwise the largest tree he's seen out of Rockefeller Centre. After he's finished the pie, Mrs. Stark had offered to send Tony to Peter's room once he was finished with Morgan, but Peter had preferred to wait for him in the living room. He likes the sharp, brisk scent of pine, which had once sent him to the hospital back when he could barely smell it. He likes the softly glowing lights, the classy decorations Mrs. Stark had clearly chosen, side by side with Morgan and Mr. Stark's chaotic additions. He likes that he'll hear Mr. Stark leave Morgan's room, so he'll know for sure if the man decides to go to bed without seeking Peter out. Mr. Stark had been so horrified that Peter wasn't eating enough. He'd always been concerned about Peter's physical needs, his caloric intake, his thermoregulation issues, anything that depressed his healing factor or put him in additional danger. Peter doesn't think Mr. Stark will let him be hungry anymore. When he finds out that Peter can't find enough under-the-table work that isn't immoral to feed himself properly and keep himself off the streets, maybe he'll give him a debit card he can use for food or sign him up for a meal service or something. Peter lets himself imagine what it would be like to eat well again. If he didn't have to spend every extra penny on food, then once his rent was paid, maybe he could buy what he needed to fix the water heater or the lock on his front door. His landlord had made it clear that Peter was taking the apartment as is, with no complaints, or he'd report that the social security number Peter had put on his application was invalid. But Peter could fix these things himself if he had the funds. There was also the pile of tech waiting for him in the spare bedroom. If he sold the laptop and the Stark pad, after he'd scrubbed them of anything extra Mr. Stark had loaded onto them, of course, he could make rent for a couple of months without having to go begging to Jameson with selfies and fuel the anti-Spider-Man sentiment that left him broken-hearted every time someone he saved cursed him out for killing Mysterio. Or he could make enough webs for a whole year not have to worry about affording the chemicals. The new phone would be helpful, but he could pawn that too if he had to. And the autographed Lego set, well, that money would do him a lot of good, but it hurts to think about selling that, when Mr. Stark had clearly gone to so much trouble. Surely it wasn't wrong for Peter to keep something for himself. Mightn't he be allowed one tiny bit of sentiment to remember what he might have had? Looks like you're swimming in some pretty deep thoughts. Peter flinches and looks up to find Mr. Stark almost within reach. So much for standing guard. He hadn't heard the man come downstairs at all. He clears his throat. Yeah. Sorry that took so long. Little Miss was a little keyed up. Demanded 5 stories before she fell asleep. Peter sits diagonally on the middle of one of the oversized couches, with a recliner nearby and plenty of other seating in the immediate area. A test, he admits to himself, as Mr. Stark assesses the situation and drops down on the end of the same couch, positioning his knees so they are just an inch or 2 from Peter's. I'm sorry I got her all worked up. Maybe if I'd read to her. None of that. Mr. Stark stretches out his leg and nudges it gently against Peter's. She can be a lot, even if you're used to it, which you aren't. It's okay that you needed a break. Peter nudges back and leaves their knees touching. Thanks. This is nothing, kid, he sighs, and all his levity melts away in a single laboured breath. I'm so sorry about May. I know we're keeping it light today, but I had to say it. I'm so damned sorry. Peter can't say that it's okay, because it's not, so he just shrugs, fighting the tears that threaten to fall. Mr. Stark presses more of their legs together, and shifts a little closer on the couch. When's Boxing Day? Peter finally manages to whisper. Excuse me? You keep saying we'll talk about what happened to me on Boxing Day, but I don't know when that is. Oh, right. Forgot everyone didn't grow up with a British butler. Boxing Day's tomorrow, Roo, December 26th. Peter can't decide if that's a good thing or a bad thing. He doesn't want to put this off any longer, really. The dread in his chest is weighing him down. He's glad he won't have to live with that much longer. But once the Starks know the truth of all he's done, that can't be undone. They won't forget again. Once they know that he's a failure who got his last living relative killed, they probably won't be so keen on letting him anywhere near their daughter. The mess Peter's in is entirely of his own making. He should be able to get himself out of it on his own. They'll see that in an instant. I know we're waiting on the big reveal, Mr. Stark said softly, but can you answer one question, just so I can sleep tonight? Peter nods. He's not in a position to deny Mr. Stark anything. He wouldn't, even if he could. I know me and Pep forgot you somehow. Happy too. Tell me we were the only ones, that there was someone beside Morgan who knew who you were. But Peter can't do that. He shakes his head. There had to be someone. Ted, your scary girlfriend. Peter shakes his head. Again. Everyone was supposed to forget. I don't know why Morgan didn't. Christ, Pete. Fuck. Mr. Stark's voice sounded tortured. He's clenching his fist so tightly that Peter hears the hinges in his prosthetic protest. And Peter doesn't want him to be sad. Can't bear it. This isn't Mr. Stark's fault. He shrugs again, trying his best to sound flippant. At least CPS didn't know to come looking for me. They should have come looking for you, Mr. Stark roars, leaping to his feet. Peter presses himself back into the sofa, thinking he might need to make a leap for the ceiling. He can't believe he miscalculated this so badly. Oh my God, please, Mr. Stark, don't call them. Please don't call them. I'll be fine on my own. I'm almost 18. I'm fine. He'd been so young the last time. That awful week between his parents' deaths and May and Ben's miraculous rescue is now mostly just a haze of sadness and strangers and harsh words and unwanted touches, and the soul-crushing knowledge that this was his life now, an unwanted burden at the mercy of an uncaring system. Then May and Ben had saved him, given him 11 wondrous years, and paid for them with their own lives. You're literally starving. How is that fine? I can't go back there. I can't. I won't be able to be Spider-Man. I need to be Spider-Man. It's all I have left. They'll stop me, or they'll find out, or they'll hurt me. I can't. Please don't make me. I'd rather starve. He has to get out of here. He can't stay. He can't. He can't. He can't. He can't breathe. Then Mr. Stark grabs his arm, and Peter flinches away so hard he nearly tips over. And Mr. Stark looks like Peter had hit him. It's enough to make Peter freeze, come what may, and search him flailing mind. He hadn't touched Mr. Stark, had he? Hadn't accidentally punched him in the face? Rue, oh God, I'm sorry, I'm not going to hurt you. You have to know I would never hurt you. Don't call them, Peter whimpers. His broken heart feels like it might burst. Is he dying? Please don't call them. I'll go. You won't get in trouble. I don't even exist. I'm not calling anyone, promise. But you have to breathe, Bambino. You're having a panic attack. No, I'm not. Speaking from personal experience, I'm pretty damn sure you are. I'm gonna reach for your hand, okay? Is it okay if I touch you? Please, he begs. Pathetic, but he doesn't want to die alone. Good boy. Mr. Stark grabs one of his hands and holds it against his chest, right where the reactor used to be. His hand is warm, but it's shaking. Feel my chest rise and fall and breathe with me, all right? In and out. In and out. You can do this. He tries, but he's feeling lightheaded now, like it's been 2 days with only a few bites of food. He thought he didn't have to feel this way anymore. Why can't he ever catch a break? I can't. You can do anything, Peter. I know it. In and out. Follow me. Forget about everything else. It's just you and me. I believe in you. Always have. He sucks in a breath, and it reaches his lungs. Tries another. It shudders through him. Good. Good. You got this, champ. In and out. Mr. Stark's hand is no longer shaking. You're safe here, Peter. I promise. You're always safe with me. Peter wishes that were true, but Mr. Stark has never wanted Peter to die in his presence. That's all that is. But he closes his eyes and lets himself pretend. I'm okay, he says sometime later, after the room's no longer spinning and his chest is only as tight as it always is now, just the usual amount of self-loathing and dread. Peter figures that's Mr. Stark's cue to let go, to make the call that will get this pathetic creature out of his house. Peter will never get to read Morgan that story after all. He never should have made that promise. He's too tired to fight whatever comes next. Let CPS come. It's less than a year until he turns 18. He'll survive. Or he won't. Maybe that will be better. Pete, Mr. Stark says, and he still sounds agonised. He's still holding both of Peter's hands. How could you think I would ever turn you over to strangers? Have I really fucked up this badly? You said CPS should have found me. Peter can't figure out why Mr. Stark looks like he's in pain. Is Peter digging his fingers into his chest? He tries to pull his hands away, but Mr. Stark doesn't let go. I mean that they should have found you and then called me. Why would they do that? Because I was supposed to take care of you if anything happened to May. Peter has so many questions, like why and when, but they don't matter really. You don't have to do that. I signed the paperwork and I swore to your aunt I'd look after you, but here I am hiding out in the woods pretending to be dead when you needed me. It's too much. May never should have asked. Why had she asked? Why had Mr. Stark said yes? You don't have to take me in like some stray. You're not some stray, you're my son. I'm not your son, he says for the second time in one day, but then he thinks of Mrs. Stark's assumption, of Mr. Stark's wild past, and the tiniest spark of hope finds a crack in the walls he's tried to build around his heart. Am I? Mr. Stark's face falls, and Peter wants to melt into the floor and never solidify. What is wrong with him? This is why he's kept himself so busy, patrolling every available moment, working as many hours as he can, reading that damn GED study guide over and over, when it doesn't really matter if he passes the test, because a man who doesn't legally exist will never get a decent job or a college degree. He's tried so hard not to stop long enough to let himself wish that things were different, because unless he can accept that they're not, he will absolutely shatter. It's been 6 weeks and he's already failing. There's no way he can do this for 6 months, let alone 6 years. 60 years, no way. He's not going to survive this. I'm sorry, May. I tried. Oh God, I'm sorry. Of course I'm not. I'm sorry. I'm so pathetic. Don't say that about yourself. Please, Pete. I can't stand it. You're not pathetic. I'm not your son. Of course I'm not. God, I wish I were. I am pathetic. I don't deserve you. I don't. But I can't do this alone anymore. He's going to panic again. He can feel it building, and this time he won't fight it. It's too much. Too much. It's all too much. Maybe Tony will hold him as he dies, the way he held Aunt May. Can you look at me, kiddo? Please? But Peter can't. Then the hand holding to Mr. Stark's chest is gone, and he's clenching his eyes shut against the sudden cold. He drives everyone he cares for away. He should be used to this by now. But there's a gentle touch under his chin, raising his head, and he opens his eyes out of shock more than anything. There you are. Look, we don't share any DNA. I'm sadder about that than I ought to be. The Stark genes are full of generational trauma and proclivities for substance abuse. You don't need any of that, especially when you're smart enough on your own. But I wish I could claim you that way. That would be a bright spot on a dark time. But I can't. There's no Playboy-sized skeletons in your mother's closet. But in every other way that matters, you are my son. The son that I want. The one that I claimed. The one that I will fight and kill and die for. The one that I invented time travel to bring back to life. He can't. It doesn't compute. You invented time travel for me. You betcha. The only thing that would make me risk one kid was the chance to bring back another. But half of all life doesn't hold a candle to you. Mr. Stark reaches up to wipe one of Peter's tears away. He hadn't even realised he'd been crying. That's crazy. Doesn't make me a very good hero, I know, but I'd like to think it makes me a pretty good father. Though not the best father, clearly, or you would have known this already. I failed you over and over, and I'm so sorry. You didn't fail me. You literally admitted a few hours ago that you're starving yourself because you can't afford food, while my net worth is more than several third world countries. Not to mention that you just had a panic attack because you thought I was going to pawn you off to strangers. How is that not failing you? It's not your responsibility to look after me. You're not listening, kid. I need you to get this through your head, all right? It's not a burden to look after you. It's a privilege. Then Mr. Stark's hand is shifting until it cradles Peter's face, holding him steady so he can't do anything but look into his eyes, which are blazing. Look, I don't know how much of that letter you read, but I meant every heartbroken, sentimental word. Losing you was agony. If not for Morgan, it might have destroyed me. But then she came along, and I realised I was mourning so hard because I loved you. Peter's breath hitches. He had read that, what seemed like ages ago. Had that really only been hours? But why would you love me? Mr. Stark freezes, and Peter wishes he hadn't derailed his train of thought, had just shut up and ignored his damn desperate curiosity, and let himself listen to the more impossible nice things. Never mind, that's an awkward question. Forget it. Nope, that's a valid question. You deserve the answer. I'm just trying to find the right words to do it justice. No need to freak out, okay? No need to panic. All good things here, I promise. Just give me a second here. Okay. His voice sounds so small in the silence between them. He waits, trying to figure out why Mr. Stark would be saying these things if they're not the truth. He isn't cruel, and if he wanted to hurt Peter, he wouldn't do it with sentiment. Even if he just wanted Peter to calm down, if he felt obligated to look out for him, this is an extremely strange way to do it. Finally, Mr. Stark seemed to rouse himself out of some kind of daze. His voice is small and quiet too. I'm an expert in a lot of fields, but love isn't one of them. My parents taught me that love had to be earned, and no matter how hard I tried, I could never figure out how to do that. So, fast forward through some mostly shitty decades. Along comes Morgan. She's extraordinary, brilliant and inventive and hilarious. Things that remind me how much I love her every time I see her. There's a look Mr. Stark gets when he talks about his daughter that Peter would never have thought him capable of back before Thanos. Like he shot Repulsor through all his walls, and his whole heart's on full display. Peter's glad he found a way to be that happy. He's also so jealous it hurts. But I didn't know any of that the day she was born. Pepper put her in my arms, and bam, I was gone. God, how I loved her. Still do, of course. Always will. But I realised, once I got over the buzz, that I'd felt that way before. The fingers on Peter's face tapped lightly against his cheek. It wasn't love at first sight with you, kid. I didn't know, that day in your apartment, how much you would mean to me. It grew, gradually, and honestly, those feelings scared me to death, so I tried not to dwell on them, refused to put a name to them, thought I was protecting us both by burying them. Clearly I was wrong. Clearly you needed to hear it even more than I needed to say it. I love you, Peter. I'm certain of that. But why? It would be easy to say that I love you because you can keep up with me in the lab, because you care so much about everyone and are literally the best person I've ever met. But that makes my love seem conditional, like I wouldn't love you if you weren't a genius and a hero. And that isn't true. It's not Spider-Man I love, it's Peter Parker. So all I can figure is that the universe made me to love you, that you're always meant to be my kid. Time halts and Peter freezes as the impossible words take root in his heart. Can you say something, Pete? I know that was a lot. You don't have to feel the same way, of course. Just maybe let me know so that I haven't ruined this, so I don't start panicking. Then Peter surges forward, colliding with Mr. Stark so hard they both almost fall, his arms wrapping tightly around his torso. Somehow Mr. Stark manages to twine an arm around Peter's back. The other hand, the flesh one, tangles into Peter's hair, cradling his head as he scratches gently at his scalp. The touch sizzles through him like electricity, leaving contentment in its wake, foreign and forgotten, and as sweet as May's chocolate chip cookies. I love you too, Peter says, because of course he does. How could he not? Mr. Stark's whole body shakes with his barked laughter. Phew. Great. Would have been awkward if you just thought of me as an aloof mentor figure. Could have called HR on me being a creep. Peter chuckles, too high and giggly, but he doesn't care. That would have been a real mess. Could you say it again, Rue? Mr. Stark's voice is back to being super serious. It's only because of his super senses that Peter hears his desperate, please. I love you, Mr. Stark. Hey now. Mr. Stark pulls back and Peter whines, unwilling to help it. It makes the man smile. I think we're past there, Bambino. If Morgan starts calling me Mr. Stark because she hears you calling me that, I'm gonna lose it. It's Tony now. Peter doesn't think he wants Morgan to start calling him Tony either, but he's not brave enough to mention that. Peter has always been deliberate in what he calls the hero. Mr. Stark conveys awe and respect and distance, and just a touch of sass. It's a suit of armour which protects Peter from getting too close, and wondering what it would be like if the man became more than a mentor who saw him as an occasionally helpful, superpowered obligation. Mr. Stark looks out for Spider-Man, because he doesn't want his death on his conscience. Again. Tony is someone who cares for Peter, in a way Peter's desperate for, in a way he's lost twice and will never have again. Tony is losing you as agony and soft Italian endearments. I love you, and can you say it again, Rue, please, and you're not a stray, you're my son. Apparently Peter doesn't need that armour anymore. I'll try. That's all I ask. Tony reaches out and ruffles Peter's hair, and Peter gets another pleasant shock. Scratch that. I also want you to stop apologising for things that aren't your fault, and putting yourself down. I don't like when people are hard on my favourite young adult. Tony, he whines. There we go. Great start. Always use my first name when you think I'm being ridiculous. Tony grins at him, and Peter smiles back, unused to this strange euphoria bubbling in his veins. Just to be absolutely clear, you are my Spiderling, and there is no person or government entity that could pry you out of my arms. Got it? Peter warms from the inside out. I think maybe I'm starting to. That's the spirit. Look, I'll never be May, and I don't want to replace her, but she did ask me to look after you, and even if she hadn't, I would have wanted to anyway. I know it probably surprises you, considering I was such a hot mess back when we hung out, but I've gotten pretty good at this whole parenting thing. 3 square meals a day, roof over your head, help with your homework, and a whole lot of love and positive affirmation. You're never going back to that shithole apartment again. Your home is right here. Or our penthouse in Manhattan, probably, because I imagine you'd want to go back to the city. We'll figure out the where, but the who isn't up for debate. You, me, Pep, and Morgan. We're a package deal now. A family. You're not alone anymore. You never will be again. Peter closes his eyes and just lets himself live in that for a second before he forges on and ruins it. You don't even know how I ended up this way. I messed up. It doesn't matter. Tony brushes the hair back from his face, then keeps his hand there, playing with his curls, which Peter doesn't have the energy or funds to try and tame anymore. There's not a single thing you can possibly tell me that will change the way I feel about you, except maybe make me love you more. I almost killed someone, he admits. If Tony's wrong, he'd rather know tonight than tomorrow. Who hasn't in our line of work? I've actually done it. Haven't always regretted it either. But... No buts. Not tonight, not ever. You can tell me all about it tomorrow and I'll figure out how to fix this whole memory lost, deleted identity thing. But you've got us, no matter what. Peter doesn't think even Tony can fix a magic spell meant to protect the multiverse. Certainly not in a day. But if there's anyone who could, it's him. He means to respond. Instead, a yawn catches him off guard, tearing through him like he's some kind of animal. All right, Rip Van Winkle. That's clearly our cue that we've shared enough feelings for tonight. Let's get you to bed. Big day tomorrow. Tony pulls Peter into his side and steers him upstairs. This was always supposed to be your room, you know, he says as they approach the spare bedroom Morgan had dragged them to earlier. I designed it for you. Full soundproofing, extra strength shades on the windows, the whole 9 yards. But I was dead, Peter says, regretting his casual phrasing when Tony stumbles and clutches him a little tighter. Sorry, but I didn't need a room. Tony twists and places a firm kiss right above Peter's eyebrow. Plans didn't seem right without a space for you, he says, still awfully close to Peter's forehead. There is a part of Peter that wants to collapse to the floor and cry, and another part that wants to run through the halls shrieking with excitement. He's so tired he does neither. He just follows Tony into the room, which looks like a store has been ransacked and a wrapping paper factory exploded. I did cry in that closet, Tony says, staring at the offending corner, which still has wrapped presents tumbling from it. Didn't know anyone but Friday knew that. He nudges a particularly large wrapped box with his foot. Better add this to our Boxing Day to-do list. There's still some real good ones you haven't opened yet. Peter can't fathom how there can still be more. This is already too much. Hey now, being extra is part of my charm, and this is 5 Christmases worth of presents. Just be glad I didn't get you a 10-foot stuffed Wookiee. Peter can't even imagine. Ned would die. You're making that up. That's not a thing. You want to bet? No way. That sounds awesome. Tony grins. I knew there was a reason we get along. Sadly, it didn't fit in your room, and Pepper vetoed keeping it down in the living room. Mrs. Stark was probably right, especially since Peter was probably dust at the time. But instead of admitting that, Peter says, You have to tell me how you got Harrison Ford to sign a box of Legos. Tony pulls Peter just a little tighter into his side. Now that's quite a story, young Padawan. Maybe we'll leave that for tomorrow too, in case we need a little levity. He releases Peter to pick through the present mountain, then hands him the one he was looking for. This should be pyjamas. We'll get you anything else you need tomorrow. Peter stares at the box covered in shiny red and blue stripes. This day has taken some bizarre turns. Why did you buy me pyjamas? Tony huffs out a laugh. Bought those after you came back to life, when I hoped you'd spend the holidays with us. There's this whole family Christmas jammies trend. We'll have to retake the photos. Morgan was pouting anyway. The thought of Mr. Stark taking family photos in matching pyjamas is so domestic. It wasn't that many years ago when Peter had to convince him he needed a tree. He'd acted like he was above common things such as traditions, although Peter had never doubted that he had a heart, no matter how well he kept it hidden. But it's strange to see that heart on full display. It's even stranger to think that Tony wants Peter to be part of those photos, that he planned this months ago, that he considers Peter family. Peter thought that he was done with family forever. He feels like he might float away. Is he dreaming, hallucinating, dying? Surely this isn't real. Good things don't happen to Peter Parker. Not anymore. But then Tony's hand is on his neck, grounding him, pushing him gently forward. Bathroom's in there. Should have everything you need. If you want me to tuck you in once you're ready, just have Friday call me. Peter twists around to look at him. Tuck me in? You know I'm not Morgan's age, right? Fine. If the young adult doesn't want a goodnight kiss, I'll just go to sleep now. I didn't say that. He's too old to be coddled. He knows this, but he wants Tony to come back. He's not ready to say goodnight and wake up from this wonderful dream. But his response came out too desperate, so he tries to compensate with sass, which he knows Mr. Stark appreciates. Will you read me a story too? Tony doesn't take the bait. I'll do anything you want, Bambino, he says, soft and serious. I'm not a baby. Peter crosses his arms over his chest because he signed an illegal lease and he does his own laundry, when he can find enough quarters, and shops for his own groceries. Not as often as he should. If he wasn't broke, he'd be an almost functional adult. Tony smirks, the softness replaced by a far more familiar expression. Sure, but you'll always be my spider baby. Tony! Tony's laughter is a wondrous sound, like a bell ringing as an angel gets its wings. I love it. I love you. Now get ready for bed. The shower is amazing. Peter hadn't been able to afford much hot water, or much water at all, so he'd make do with short, punishing showers that left him shivering for hours afterwards, even when he wore his coat to bed. After one particularly brutal patrol, he'd allowed himself to splurge, but the lukewarm water had turned icy cold after just 2 minutes. He knows the hot water here will never run out, and the Starks probably won't even look at their bills. Considering the astronomical amount of money Tony must have spent on all those presents, Peter can't bring himself to feel bad about this one indulgence. As he stands under the spray, the tension that's been coiled in his muscles for months melts. He breathes, and the air doesn't get caught in his chest. Instead of the cheapest bar of soap and a bottle of shampoo he could get at the bodega, this shower is stocked with luxurious liquids in flashy bottles with fancy names he doesn't recognise. When he lathers up his greasy hair, he realises he's going to smell like Tony. Today has been filled with such highs and lows. Now he's not entirely sure how he feels. Exhaustion has settled in the space between the extremes. He is used to quick assessments whenever he returns to his apartment. Which crisis is most critical? Where must he divert his limited funds, his limited energy, his limited ability to care? Is he bleeding so hard that he has to eat so his healing will do something? Or is a few dollars better spent on a new roll of bandages he'll just bleed through? Is he so cold he'll need to nudge up the thermostat up a degree? Or does he need to save for chemicals for the webs he's almost out of? Should he go out on patrol even though his leg might be infected and he's definitely lightheaded? Because the alternative is convalescing alone in his apartment and facing the reality of his situation head on. But he closes his eyes and there's no crisis. He is fed and warm and safe and loved and known. Those last two the most wondrous of all. He's gotten good at handling pain that's just physical. It's the emotional stuff that still brings him to his knees. You won't believe the day I've had, May. He's gotten used to speaking to her aloud, even when he's not by her grave. It gives him someone to talk to that isn't JJ's assistant or a petty criminal. It started out pretty rough, but you sent me a guardian angel, just like I asked for. He sees Morgan barrelling at him out of nowhere in her ridiculous outfit, Mr. Stark hanging back but not turning him away. Morgan had saved him. He still doesn't understand how, by finding and dragging him out of the cold. But he'd still been lost until Tony had remembered, until Tony had told him so many wonderful things. You're my son, I love you, your home is right here, you're not alone anymore. 2 angels maybe, both much better than Clarence. He chuckles, and it shudders through him. Mr. Stark, Tony's going to look after me. Thanks for asking him to do that. I think I'm going to be all right now. I'm going to try. He opens his eyes, though he looks away from his sickly reflection in the gleaming shower wall. I love you, May. I'll come visit soon. He could have stayed under that spray for hours, but he doesn't want to keep Tony waiting. There will be other nights, other showers. The towel waiting for him is soft and heated. Peter didn't even know towel racks could do that. After he dries off, he wraps it around his waist and opens the box Tony handed him. Peter's used to cotton or flannel pyjamas. He thinks this soft and slightly slippery material must be silk. Ned's parents had made him and his sister wear matching Christmas pyjamas once. They'd been garish and hilarious, with a cartoon Santa and lots of reindeer. Theirs are nothing like that. The red and green plaid is elegant, something Mrs. Stark would wear. Peter stupidly wonders if the shining threads woven through are real gold. They feel amazing though on his dry and chapped skin, almost like a hug. The bed is huge and Peter barely has the forethought to pull the covers back before he collapses onto it. As soon as his back hits the mattress, he lets out a moan that he's glad no one's around to hear. Oh wow, maybe this is what it means to sleep on a cloud. There's so many pillows and they somehow offer just the right amount of support on his neck. He tugs the covers back over himself. He'd thought they might be silk too, but they're cotton, but so light and soft that they must be made from that fancy expensive cotton from Egypt, or something that rich people are always talking about. The bedding's all in familiar shades of red and blue that Peter knows they were chosen just for him. Friday, could you tell Mr. Stark I'm ready? Certainly, young boss. Peter isn't expecting that nickname, any more than he expects the pleasant voice to continue. I'm glad you've returned. Though it is hard to quantify it, Boss has not been the same in your absence. Oh golly, thanks. Peter's still reeling from that little revelation when Tony enters, no more than a minute or two since Friday summoned him. Tony halts in the doorway as his slightly elevated heartbeat slows. The realisation that he's wearing the matching pyjamas does something weird to Peter's heart as well. Well, don't you look clean and cosy? Then he's crossing the room and fussing with Peter's covers, actually tucking them under the mattress. Are you warm enough? I can bring you another blanket. Peter is so warm he thinks he might overheat during the night. No, this is good. Everything's good. You promise? Because you can ask for anything. Can you stay? It's out of his mouth before he can stop himself. Just until I fall asleep, I mean. Gosh, sorry, you don't have to. Pete, you just saved me from having to awkwardly ask if I could camp out here for a while. We're all good. I want to. Oh. It's going to take some time getting used to this easy affection. It might be easier once he gets some sleep. Now that he's laying down, his exhaustion's getting stronger, making his body heavy and his mind slow. Tony rolls the desk chair across the room and around the erupting present mountain until it's right beside the bed. This okay? Mm-hmm. Tony rubs at Peter's shoulder and then settles into the chair. Night, kiddo. I love you. Then he asks Friday to decrease the lights to 3%. Peter expects to fall asleep quickly, wrapped in comfort with the sound of Tony's distinctive heartbeat so near. But as soon as he closes his eyes, he worries what will happen once he opens them. What if this is just a dream? What if he wakes up back in his apartment, alone? Or what if he stays but Tony's memories disappear again? Maybe Dr. Strange will show up in his room complaining about a disturbance in the Force. Now that Peter's known again, will the multiverse start to crumble? I think I'll have to buy Morgan a pony now for remembering you. She'll name it Spidey and it'll be best friends with Gerald, and I'll have to find a place to board both of them in Manhattan. Peter snorts and rolls over on his side. Tony is leaned back in the chair, a foot propped up on the edge of Peter's bed. In the dim light, Peter can barely see him raise an eyebrow. What? You're not asleep? I can hear you thinking too hard all the way over here. Peter sighs and stretches out an arm in Tony's general direction. It's probably too dark for Tony to notice, but he does it anyway. Tony rolls a little closer and covers Peter's hand with his own. Your sister deserves whatever she wants after making me track you down, of course. But livestock management in the city is going to be a trial, is all I'm saying. Your sister. He has a sister now. He'd wanted a sibling when he was little, but when he hadn't had parents, he'd have settled for a cousin. But he never gotten one of those either. The darkness hides his tears, but his sniffling is loud in the quiet room. Oh, Rue. Suddenly Tony is perched on the edge of Peter's bed. One hand grips Peter even tighter. He raises the other to Peter's face and wipes away the tears with his silk Christmas pyjamas. And something inside Peter breaks. So many times today he's fought his tears, and except for the breakdown after the homeless guy invited him to feast, he mostly succeeded. Now they shudder through him in a full-body sob, his lungs spasming in awful harmony. But Tony is there, tugging Peter into his chest. Hey now, Tesoro, I've got you. I'm right here. You're not alone. I've got you. Not, don't cry, you're okay. But, I've got you. I'm here. One of Tony's hands rubs up and down Peter's back while the other strokes his hair, and Peter knows, even as he can't quite catch his breath, that he'll feel better once he's cried himself out, that he truly will be okay. When the tears finally stop, he feels so much lighter, even though his chest hurts and his head is filled with congestion. Sorry, he whispers. I don't even know why I was crying. I have several guesses, and I don't even know the whole story. Tony eases himself back and starts wiping Peter's tears away with his sleeve again, and then hands him a box of tissues from the bedside table. Sorry if that was weird. I promise I do know that you're not 6. I just can't turn off my dad instincts when I see one of my kids hurting. I don't remember what it's like to have a dad. Ben had been so good to him, kind and patient and loving. He taught Peter how to be a man, and never made him feel like a burden, even though he was. But Ben had made it very clear that he was Peter's uncle, not his father. He'd corrected Peter once, gently but firmly, and Peter had never made that mistake again. Peter had learned at 6 that parents were for other people. May and Ben loved him, and they'd take care of him, but he'd never have a mom or dad again. Peter can hear Tony's heart stutter. He can feel the silence between them shiver across his skin before Tony whispers, I can fix that, if you want. Tony will never replace Ben, or May, or Richard and Mary Parker. It's not like changing a worn-out tyre, tossing out the old for something new. What Tony and Peter have is entirely different, and it doesn't discount the others who'd raised him before. But Tony is the one left now, and Peter needs him, desperately. He doesn't think any of the Parkers would mind. Please. It'd be my honour. Then they're embracing again, and words aren't strong enough to express the gratitude Peter feels. So he says what he thinks Tony needs to hear, far more than any thank you. I love you so much. Before tonight, Peter hasn't let himself think that, because what use is love that will never be reciprocated? But it's true. It's so true. It fills him now, every empty hollow that tears and misery left behind. Tony's voice, when he finds it, is thick with tears. Oh, Peter, you have no idea how much I love you. But after today, Peter thinks he does. Tony presses a lingering kiss to Peter's temple, then drops his forehead so they're pressed together, his hand cradling Peter's neck, just holding him there. Merry Christmas, Pete, he whispers. Welcome home. Thank you for listening. I hope you have a lovely day and happy holidays.